a
Water
water
bottle.
bottle that I've been using for like possibly close to a year now because recycling, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so and I don't mind, it's fine. I don't care if that was an alcohol bottle. You
Yeah,
do whatever you need to do
yeah.
within reason.
I'm sure there's gonna be a question about it. Is that an alcohol bottle on stream? But
No,
I don't think anyone really
people
cares.
don't ask those questions.
I hope not.
We go. Okay.
Awesome.
So I'm gonna stop clicking things so that hopefully nothing else breaks. We will wait to see what happens with regards to folks starting to come in. In the meantime, we'll chill.
Okay.
And I was thinking I'll keep an eye on the clock. We'll go. I'll let you know when we hit like the hour mark, and we'll kind of see how things are going.
Sounds perfect.
And just kind of go from there. Like I said, feeling today. Sorry.
Okay. I
And
understand.
we'll and then when we wrap up, I'm just gonna go to bed. It'll be like probably 9:30 or 10 or so. By the time.
It's okay. I'm getting used to the whole going to bed at 1 AM thing again because 'cause I'm East Coast. Uh, I mean, I've been doing that for about the better part of 2 months now, and it
Mm.
still hasn't gotten to me. I used to go to bed at 11, and I'm just like, "Okay, what now I'm adjusting my clock again."
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. Like I felt really kind of yesterday too, and so the weather was super super nice here, and Jasmine was out on the balcony, and like she was like, "You want to get a drink and like sit out here with me?" And I was like, "You can tell I'm not feeling well when I'm like, nah, I don't think I'm gonna drink any alcohol today. I
I don't
think I'm
think I
just gonna go to bed."
that's a good way of looking at it. Just your ability to tolerate alcohol is kind of indicative of your ability to function.
It's indicative of like my health status. I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
think I need every
I
bit
need every
of
bit of, energy that I have.
yeah.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, seeing some, people,
Yeah.
flood in here a little bit now.
Tupac
That's gonna
lives
be
and Fargo's here and
apocalypse.
Hoss. Tupac is dialing in from
From the grave.
from the Bahamas where Elvis and
He's hanging out
Biggie
with
and
a couple other people down there. He's hanging out with, I'm trying to not to say 2 names that I know that are probably dead, but are actually possibly not, but I'm not gonna repeat it on stream, so
oh man.
one of them is presumed to have killed himself in a cell, but,
Oh. Do you think Epstein's down there?
yeah, I think he's just chilling out there with a bunch of other people, you know?
Tupac, Elvis.
Mm, the guy that presumably killed himself in 1945 that I'm not gonna repeat on stream, you
Hmm.
know? Yeah.
So
So, anyway, um,
oh,
this is, Nick
so
Naylor.
Nick Naylor. Watch a bunch of your YouTube videos presently. Cool to watch the stream before work. Oh, right on. Welcome. Um, Banana
Honestly,
Highway.
I'm really glad that you're tuning in to see the development of the Fall Guys MMO. It's been honestly one of my favorite things to say, and now I finally get to say it on the stream. So yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
I'm really a big fan of the placeholder asset, and if there's not a gnome race that is about that size, that is going to be in the final release, I'm going to be very sad.
Well, the placeholder asset's actually pretty big.
I mean, relatively to like what other creatures are in the game, I guess so. He's
Yeah.
like a full-bodied humanoid.
Well, I mean, the placeholder is like 2 meters tall, but when you look at the girth on like a 2 meter capsule, hey now, um,
Hey,
the girth is substantial because if you were to like look at an ogre, it's as girthy as
yeah,
an ogre almost. So
it's a big chungus, would you
mhm,
say?
yes. So we'll have to look at proportions once we get actual the player models in and animated and stuff. So
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Stealth Beast, how's it going? Uh, I'll talk about him in a little bit. That's actually one of my friends from elementary school. I linked him
oh
to stream.
Oh,
He was
crazy.
the one that got me into EverQuest,
All
actually.
right. Well,
So it's kinda fun.
don't tell the whole story yet, because
Oh, no, no,
it's
I'm
not.
just explaining who that is.
We're still ramping
That's
up.
him.
It only
Oh,
counts
yeah.
once you've told everybody who you are, and you can't
Oh,
do
yeah,
that
yeah, I
yet.
forgot. People don't know who I am. It's
You
fine.
can't do that yet.
Mm,
And you can say as much or as little as you want on that front.
it's fine.
Respect your privacy.
I
Um,
respect yours to some extent.
my privacy is
I
not
mean,
very
your
good.
privacy is not very good. That's what I'm
No.
saying. You're literally spilling every bit of EverQuest's internal secrets on stream with everyone's consent. So it's amazing.
I'll be honest. We've got like 50 plus hours of interviews, and we haven't hit. We most of the dirt is still it's still under the rug.
And where it shall stay. I'll be
Well,
honest.
we'll
We're about
wait.
promoting positivity here,
Yes.
and I mean, some things are best never said. Said honestly. What was the? Some things are better left unsaid. I think that's
Mm.
how the expression goes.
Uh,
I think that rings true with a lot of industry.
well, with life in general, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
so folks in the stream, how's the audio right now? I mean, I know that the stream itself tends to be a bit quiet. I'm gonna work on that.
I hope mine's okay. I've been kind of using the new NVIDIA broadcaster feature, which is excellent, by the way.
Cool.
If you guys have a card that's capable of utilizing that, please do. It's actually really, really cool. I just got a new headset too. This thing is completely brand new.
Nice.
Well, not it's refurbished, but new, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Makes sense. Every once in a while, I'm gonna have to fiddle with this dude just because, unlike P99, I guess there really is an AFK timer here. So
Oh, this is live. Oh, I just
yeah.
realized that.
Well, and the only reason why I wanted it to be live was instead of, I guess it would have made more sense to be on P99,
Or
or
taxi or
even,
something. Yeah.
yeah, that would be even better. But I wasn't that
Yeah.
prepared. I'm sorry.
Honestly, I wasn't either. So
I didn't even think about until I was logging in. I was like, oh well,
let
I
me just be honest. I just love EverQuest in general. The fact that you
yeah.
have your Azalil on stream. You got to get that character Azalil's ring.
Oh,
You know,
that would. I'll have
ring of
to wait for
analogies.
quite a while for people to power up considerably to then
Yeah,
come back and like carry me through the content.
that's fine. Is this on Aridin? I mean,
Yeah, it's on Eridan.
so I mean, right now you're in actually, I think you have the chainmail that still drops in Kunark. I can't remember which of or Velius rather. This Vulak loot that's still in there with your name on it.
Really?
And oh yeah, are you
There's
on Mischief or
there there
Thornblade?
was only the two that I know of that happened. It was the ring and the chainmail. Yeah.
Yeah, the rank. There's actually oh wait, you're right. That's possibly correct. I know there's also one that was removed. Ring of Anger and the Chainmail were both removed in favor of the Ring of Analogies.
Yeah.
Um, Emperor's SSRA drops the ring. The Chainmail used to drop off of either Emp or Visdra the Cursed, actually.
Mm.
And I do like that you solidified yourself in MMORPG lore by calling yourself or you didn't call yourself. Someone called you the Burrower guy in a
Oh,
famous 40 Days rant.
yeah. Was that? Oh, yeah. I guess Führer called me the burrower
Yeah, if
guy.
you're played the fire.
He said the only person not smoking crack, which that is not true.
Oh, oh, yeah, but he really liked that event, and we'll get into that later. I really like that event for a different reason.
That's funny. It's funny because I did, believe it or not, like that event took, it took 2 days, 3 days to build,
Mhm.
tune, and then on the like around the fourth day, I think, I watched those guys
I
actually
honestly think
play
it's
it.
amazing that the crowning accomplishment of EverQuest to Blizzard Entertainment was the Burrower event.
Big
I
worm.
I think it was amazing.
Oh,
Yeah,
was
that
it
was
Tiggle?
Tiggle.
Okay,
Yeah,
that
Tiggle
actually
Biddy's
makes me
boy kept
happier.
Zeppelin.
I'd
Yeah.
rather get a compliment from Tiggle than Fuhrer any
Yeah,
day.
yeah. The less said, the better.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay. So
so
I tell you what, like we got some folks in here. It looks like
mhm.
some some friends have appeared, and about 15 minutes after, and it sounds like you got a lot of stuff to talk about. So,
Yeah.
want to kick this off for the usual way? You tell everybody who you are and a little bit about yourself. I'll start
Sure.
the VOD right there, and then we'll go.
Oh. Oh, well. Well, okay. My name's Secrets. You might know me as my stage name Secrets, but in reality, offline, I'm known as Edward Spaws. I'm a EQ Emulator contributor. I've made the Classless Server. It's various many forms. And then about 6 years ago, I started going into industry. Um, I'm 30 years old. That's very young for someone that's playing EverQuest. A lot of that is in part due to the fact that my friends from elementary school actually tipped me off to EverQuest being a game, and they said you could go to this cool new fantasy world where, I mean, coming off of this, I historically I'd only play games like on the N64. I've
Mhm.
only played games on on Super Nintendo or Genesis. So coming into this concept of virtual world was new to me. My mom had just gotten me a Gateway computer, like
Oh,
8 or 9
nice.
years old, and Gateway was like cutting edge technology at the time. It had
I know
a
I had
video
one. I was
graphics
so
card.
amped.
Yeah, it didn't have a Video's graphics card, so I was like, "Hey, is there any shops nearby that can, get that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so she gets me a Video card, and then I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna play this EverQuest game." I get in there, I start spawning in there because my friends are like, "Oh, you gotta get their name." I make my account, log in, create my character. I'm so pumped. I fall off Kelton and die, and probably it would have been there. I would have quit the game right there and then. And but
Can
the next day I came back.
can I ask?
Sure.
I've already got a couple questions. First of all, how old were you then?
I was 8 or 9 years old, I believe. And this was I can't remember the exact age I
Oh,
was. It was 2001. So this is after I came in kind of at the time you took over and started making the Luckland content. I had the classic UI enabled when I first logged into the game. So this is like end of Velius, beginning of Luckland. So quite literally 2 weeks after I started playing, they ditched it and the old UI, and I got back into the new UI, which was a jarring change for me as a new player in
oh,
itself.
crazy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, so around that period, that was like my baby game designer period. I was an apprentice, just trying to desperately get on the team during that period. So the it's funny picturing like 8, 9 year olds like playing during that period.
Asking for my mom's credit card to go sign up for this monthly fee. This was a bizarre concept for my mother at the time, by the way,
I
paying
bet.
monthly to play a video game. So it was very hard to convince her, but she saw that my friends at the time, um, Stealth Beast is in chat right now. That was actually the guy who had his brother who was in Legion of Little Folk on Povar that actually got me into the game. And we heard this story that he told us about. He was in Kale Dracal, and his uh, his brother had basically lost his connection to his mouse as he was fighting the Avatar of War or something like that. I can't remember which boss it was, but they were trying to kill AOW, or it might have been Derek or the Vindicator, one of those bosses that would, if you screwed it up that early into the fight when no one was ready, he would wipe the raid. So he was worried because his mouse got disconnected, and as a result of his mouse getting disconnected, if you hold W on your keyboard and you start going forward and you lose connection to your mouse back then, it would
Mhm.
actually just you just keep auto running because there's
Yeah.
no way to actually send the key up event.
Hmm.
And knowing what I know now about programming, that's absolutely hilarious to me because there is no way to tell if you lost a device and reset the inputs. And actually, to this day, that bug is still present in the EverQuest for Macintosh client, which is still awesome. And it probably is even in EQ Live to some extent. But that being said, that incident, that whole notion that this player could screw up an entire raid by just auto running into a boss was really cool to me. Because before this, I had no concept of like multiplayer games. I think it was limited to, using my Game Shark on Pokemon, getting the best Pokemon, and then fighting my friends with it, much to their chagrin. Um, but yeah, 8 or 9 years old, I'm here playing this game, and I'm told you can go in the rats you can go find rats. You can go in the sewer and kill rats and stuff. And I was like, I was expecting this intricate, highly detailed world that sounded way better than it was in my mind. And it turns out I spawn into Kelethin, die, and that was the beginning of my EverQuest experience. I almost swore it off. Like 2 or 3 days later, I decided, you know what? I didn't give this a good enough shot because I'm 8 or 9 years old. Maybe there's something I'm not understanding. So I go back in there, and I say, I'm gonna make a magician this time. I'm gonna start in Kias because my friend made this character who is a warrior, and he's a human warrior. We didn't know anything about game mechanics back then, but he found out later that human warrior is actually one of the worst choices for warrior that you can make. But we did it because we wanted to start all in the same location. We
Yeah.
didn't care about ogre. We wanted to be together because we're playing this game together. And that sense of community is honestly something that's stuck with me to this very day.
So
And
how many 8 or 9 year olds were together at the point? How many of it was you playing?
I
Were
mean,
you?
here's the thing. We were scared as like 8 or 9-year-olds playing this game. If we told our actual age, we were worried we'd get banned
Yeah.
because this game's T for teen. And we're not teenagers. We're young kids actually playing this game on our own. And I'm already in the gifted program. Like I can handle an adult video game. I go in there and there's people using perfect capitalization and grammar talking to each other. So my brain at that time thought I'm going to try and socialize because there's other people in this game world. I want to get to know these people. But here's the problem. I didn't know how to use a keyboard effectively. And it wasn't until I was like 13 or 12, 13, 14 that I really learned how to type quickly. So, and also, I had no concept of internet typing styles. My experience with typing on the internet was limited to something that predates the IRC chat room system. It was on basically a community-made chat for a game called Creatures, which was actually an artificial intelligence simulator that was completely offline. I fell in love with that game, and that game was amazing, by the way. But in hindsight, it wasn't really that in depth, but it was enough to at least entertain me as a kid, and I really loved that game.
So
Uh, yeah.
did you find that you picked up typing pretty quick or?
I actually could attribute my typing skills entirely to EverQuest. I taught myself for a while. There's a guy in a like 23-year-old young guy that was really cool in I think it was our computer studies class in middle school.
Mhm.
He was really into it because he would play his own sort of games. I think he played Dark Age of Camelot or something at the time.
Mhm.
And he was the whole purpose of that class was to teach people how to type. We'd play like typing games. I think it was like a 2D typing game where you had to type things and it would teach you the proper way to type things. And then once you passed the lesson, it would give you a game to play. There were some really creative ways that existed back then. I mean, like Typing of the Dead, which is
Mhm.
basically House of the Dead 2, except with the ability you had to type things to learn instead of there's some really creative ways to get kids going. And I think as a young person, EverQuest was like not the tutorial for that, but the experience. That was like the post game content of learning how to type, and I thought it was really cool.
So you basically you had EQ going from elementary school into middle school, like
High
this
school
high
into
school.
adulthood. Yeah. I grew
Wow.
up this game was my babysitter, which was incredible. I mean, you were probably like a young adult then, just making this game, wanting to get in there as a designer.
I was
You're
like my
seeing like the
mid
legends.
20s. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like exactly what self-based. We played a game called Wolfenstein Enemy Territory. My dad saw an ad for this game in the newspaper, the local newspaper for Wolfie Day. And that game we had to be quick about typing because if we type too long, our characters are just sitting ducks there.
Mhm.
They're basically just they're going to die if they don't type quickly. And for me, that was just like an incredibly good skill. Not only did we have to learn how to type, but we had to learn to type quickly. And if we didn't learn to type quickly, then this would happen. We
So
would just die.
did you find like were you fairly unique then in your school? Like, I went to high school. My dad moved us when I was like 13 going on 14. He moved us to Alabama, Dothan, Alabama, because he worked at an army base near there, and that's where he retired. And so a
I
bit of a
think
culture shock. And I was shocked at how different I was from the rest of the folks there. So I don't know how other people's high school was. What
So
there
my high
many?
school, let me just first prefix this with how my middle school went. Um, sorry, I'm just typing in my nestmate real quick, just letting uh, uh, but yeah, my middle school was actually incredibly amazing. Middle school was basically I was coming to terms with myself. I was you know, I was starting to hit that prepubescent stage where you're like, I really want to start. I want to figure out what I am. I want to
Mm,
figure out my identity. I want to figure out what I'm good at. I want to poke around because I know EverQuest taught me that I was kind of different than everyone else. On top of, you know, the people over at the schools are saying like you're in the gifted program. That means you got something talented. I was like,
mm,
well, what sets me apart from other people? And I didn't know that. And to be honest, I thought they were crazy because I didn't know I was doing much more than anyone else. I thought I was falling behind. Turns out, middle school basically told me that I really liked what the teachers were doing more than the students were, because the students would bully me relentlessly
yeah.
for different reasons. They would pick fights with each other, and it wasn't till really fifth grade that I really realized that I could actually make friends with people because the concept was just limited to my friend down the street or people online.
Hmm.
So having limited amounts of friends in high school or middle school was kind of what I had to deal with. And on top of that, we could also just go online. We'd go on AOL Instant Messenger. We'd private message each other. I'd hop in IRC chats and get banned from them for having an AOL host name, that sort of thing. That was a big deal back then. Is if you had an AOL host name, you weren't considered cool. You were considered like one of the people that just bought an AOL CD and connected to the internet. A lot of this knowledge is just lost to time because no one actually has AOL anymore. No
Mm,
one really mentions it in casual conversation unless, you know, you're talking about AOL. Well, for me, that was an integral part of learning as a child was actually going up there and learning everything I needed to know socially. But then the problem is applying it offline.
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so in terms of what you had to deal with moving stuff, I didn't have to do that. I had to deal with moving what I learned online to the offline realm where I'd actually learn and interact with things. And then, of course, I was that kind of kid that would always, you know, try and learn how things work. I'd always try and disassemble things. My elementary school gifted teacher would always give me technology to like little pieces of motherboards that were basically scrap otherwise, and
Mm,
let me look at them and try and you know just either take them apart, see how they work, see how much force it takes to take something off a board, and then of course they'd let me play Number Muncher on the computer, or they let me play Oregon Trail, all these other legacy computer games that were basically on Commodore 64 or on a Apple II or something like that. So I was still getting all of the legacy technology that people dealt with. My mother actually was a Commodore 64 programmer as for a profession
oh,
before I was
rad.
even born. So she knew like Fortran, COBOL, BASIC, the whole bit.
Was that
And
was that her? So was that her profession or was it a hobby?
she got a degree doing it. I don't know if it was actually a profession past, 1985 or so, because
Okay.
she didn't keep up with it. She got her degree in 1976 for computer science. She got a bachelor's or associate's, one of the two. I think it was a bachelor's because she had a 4-year college.
Super cool.
Um, so or that was 2-year. So whatever that was back then was
Bachelor's.
what she
Yeah.
basically got. Yeah.
Okay.
So she got a bachelor's in computer science, and of course that knowledge is now useless except for the fact that she knew and couldn't speak the language that I was looking into. When she
Mm,
saw stuff like, the Sonic 3 and Knuckles level select sheet, and she saw like how it's cycling through, she knew that when numbers incremented, it would change the type of object displayed. And that kind of knowledge subconsciously transferred to me as I'm playing video games because older video games like Sonic and Knuckles would actually contain all this information, but it would also expose it to the end user. So I get curious because you have games that are commercial products like EverQuest that would not expose this stuff to you.
right.
You'd maybe see like an error message occasionally, or you're teleported beneath the world, and my brain is like, why is this happening? Because I always love to see what makes a game tick, and I think that curiosity gene, I'll go into that later, is basically what powers engineers and early learning for engineers. Like people that are driven to go into this industry will actually eventually get to that point where they want to actually explore the stuff. So that was me.
Mhm.
Um, I around high school, I started to explore other parts of my life. Mainly, I tried to get more into socialization, figure out who I am as a person. I had a bout where I, question gender identity. I still haven't figured that out, by the way. I don't even know what gender is to this point in day, or why it's important to identify as one. But in high school, that's where I explored a lot of that.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that meant that a lot of my emotional issues were driven by the fact that I didn't know why I didn't fit in. So
Yeah.
around ninth grade, I actually was taken out of the high school, and I doubled down on the fact that I had an online community of friends. And then 10th grade, 11th, and 12th, I was basically homeschooled because I couldn't handle the social situations. I was a very aggressive, angry person. And that's just the reality of what it was. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Mental health was at an all-time low.
Yeah.
So by the time I'm graduating, I'm actually graduating not with flying colors and a cool senior project like everyone else was. I had completed maybe 3 assignments for the year because I felt like I was better than it. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it again. That's just how I felt because I
Mhm.
was doing stuff that was leagues above what I wanted to do. And I actually thought to myself, that's all I needed to do. And then, of course, I was in a specialized program. There was a vocational technical school that I went to for networking. And because they didn't have a programming course at this vocational school, they
Okay.
had an amazing professor, Larry Byron, who was at that local school. And to this day, I still take a lot of his teachings in stride. He basically taught me that I can do these things that I want to do in industry, and that the only time I ever fail at doing these is when I give up, when I stop going.
Mm.
And that's also a recurring theme in my life. If I stop what I'm doing and just stop to talk about what I haven't done, then I'm never going to do anything in the future. And I
Mhm.
think to this day, that's still a big problem for me. It's something I still haven't solved,
It's
along with a
relatable.
lot of
That's very relatable.
yeah. It's like every part of this, and there's ways to curb honestly all of what I'm doing, and that is focusing. And I mean, focus is a big problem for me still. I'm not gonna lie. I have problems focusing to this very day. I cannot, if I'm distracted by something, take myself off of a conversation. Um, I actually got laid off from my last company for that reason. I couldn't stop typing in like 30-minute long Discord conversations because I really enjoy talking with people
Mm.
about issues. So I had to take a step back even recently. This is something that I don't think I'll ever actually solve, but I could at least mitigate. And I
Yeah.
think having the self-awareness to mitigate and analyze the fact that these things are happening is actually a big part of solving your own mental health, even if you have mental health problems historically like I have or not.
So
And
during the period you're describing, though, where essentially all this is going on, and you discover networking, so you you're
meanwhile, this is actually the time period where I'm tinkering with EverQuest
yeah.
Emulator. In about
Oh, cool.
2006,
I was gonna
that was
ask.
that was like ninth grade, and that's where this is gonna tie into this a lot because in ninth grade, I started that was like 2006, I think, because I graduated in 2009, class of 2009. And by that point, I was like in ninth, 10th grade. And then by the time I actually graduate, I'm 18 years old. I'm an adult. And then I asked them purposefully to actually hold me back from my vocational networking class because I felt there was stuff I still needed to learn. And I mean, at that point, I took the opportunity because it allowed me to finish a copper cabling certification. I was ready to double down on networking. And then um 2000 so that period of 2006 is when I first started tinkering in this stuff. I knew nothing about that. I'll be honest, like, compared to what I know now, I knew nothing back then about what I would do now, and I think that's perfectly fine. I say to new engineers when they enter the industry, "You don't know anything? That's fine. You can still learn. It's never too late to learn. If you double down on the things that you actually like to do, you can the sky's the limit, man. You
Yeah.
just got so many people do not actually pursue their dreams because they're afraid of pursuing their dreams because of failure. And that's understandable. I still have imposter syndrome, a massive amount of imposter syndrome, but
Yeah,
I still
well,
have it.
that's also extremely relatable. I was just having that conversation over the weekend. I was talking
Mhm.
to someone for a bit, and they had mentioned it, and I'm like, I've got like near crippling imposter syndrome. You know, it
I think
doesn't necessarily convey because, well, I can't have it happen here, right? But
Yeah, right.
it's a constant, right? And so it's funny. The more people I talk to, the more I found that I've seen the prevalence, and it's a pain in the ass. Going back, um, I'm curious. So you say you started working on like EQ Emulator 2006, but how did you find it? Like,
I found it because I really loved EverQuest. I started to get disenfranchised with the game after, Gates of Discord. Then they started making more expansions just catering to just raiders, actually. And I think that
mm,
was actually the end of EverQuest for me. I started getting involved with EverQuest too
mhm,
because it was a more casual game mode. It fit my playstyle a lot
yeah,
more. And I know Cryptini had mentioned this just the other day, and I think Monsters and Memories or your Discord. That people were speaking highly of how I knew everything basically in EverQuest 2. That's because I did the same thing to EverQuest 1 that I did to EverQuest 2. I looked at every nook and cranny. I wanted to see how everything of this game was completed. And then when I see things like, Scott Hartman's interview, and I see how this game was actually created, it was basically done in such a short period of time. And I think that was the most incredible feat of content development I've ever seen. The fact that EverQuest 2 had this amazing, intricate lore and this game world just built. If you look at EverQuest 2 and the amount of books and little bits of text and so many things to explore and do,
yeah.
the fact that this was done in basically 9 months after they is just incredible to me. The fact that all this voiceover work was done in such a short period of time. I'm
Mhm.
sure it's easier to do now that you're just that you have like a 300 person dev team working on the game than compared to like 40, which most games like EverQuest are now have staff a team of like maybe 40 to 60 people because they're trying to maximize profits for operations. But back then there was basically no limit. They were coming off the high of EverQuest being the most profitable game. I'm referencing Jet Butler's interview, where he said
Mhm.
EverQuest was the most profitable game that Sony in general had ever had, and I can see why because Bill Trust, Brad McQuaid, and John Smedley had put their heart into this thing, and I'm just like that's incredible to me. The fact that someone had an idea, ran with it, and made something authentic and genuine for them. EverQuest 2, they were working under pressure to kind of, put together the thing that EverQuest 1 was. And I actually am very impressed to this day that hearing all the content that I loved in EverQuest 2 was done in 9 months is incredible. Just as a content developer for Emulator,
Yeah.
turned programmer, turned, learning every single aspect of what makes a game tick. That was incredible to me, and still is to this day. That was pulled off in such a short period of time.
So during that 2006 period, as you're getting into the emulator scene, did you consider yourself a programmer, or was it
I thought I
an
was just
explorer?
being cool. I was just an explorer. I
Mm,
was just a visitor. I felt like I had the opportunity to do things here, but I didn't know how. And I think that's a lot of how a lot of people getting into the industry for the first time. You see a lot of Gen Z folks that say game dev is really cool, but I don't know how to get into it.
mm,
And to this day, I still don't have a good answer for them. I mean, the interview processes could be brutal. You're dealing with multiple year veterans that have basically experience on you, and you're trying to impress these people. And there's no real way to actually do that short of, doing something that would actually impress them. So me as a engineer at that point just considered, the concept of ever working for a games company just basically off the table. And I think that's because of a different couple different factors, mainly due to just graduating high school, having no direction, having basically been bullied the entire time you were in high school, among other reasons. So I'm an explorer in 2006 looking into this. I'm looking for my way to make my mark.
yeah,
And I think you might be able to relate to that when you see people wanting to leave a part of themselves in games. Like they put their love and heart into a game, or they'll put just enough effort in there that it makes it theirs.
yeah,
I think that part of it is actually something that a lot of people want to do, but a lot of people do not know how to do without directly impacting other people working on the product. And that alone separates people who want to get in the games industry versus people who love the games that are made in the industry. And that's something I really have no way to actually. If someone says, "How do I get into games?" I'm going to get the customer support job you got in 2015. How do I get that? There's no way to actually tell people the exact steps that I did to do that. It was just a matter of circumstances that happened. One led to another, where I actually ended up in the industry. But going back to 2006, I had sworn off the idea of ever going into the industry. It's just not a possibility. I got to be honest, I never actually thought that I'd actually be able to get into the industry, and that was it. So when I saw someone from EQ to or Emu converse with some random Sony developer, I got to be honest, I don't know who it was. Someone actually joined the EQ2 Emu IRC chat around that time that I started, checking stuff out. I think it was about 2007. I'd have to go check my IRC chat logs. I have like 17 hard drives of like dead computer components that just have IRC chat logs on them. I have stuff dating back from like the EQ Classic IRC days, or Project EQ back when I have like all these sorts of old logs that remind me where I've come and what I'm doing now. But the important thing is, I saw this guy from Sony Online Entertainment. He probably shouldn't have been in there, but he knew, whoever it was, that these people were doing something that impressed him,
Right.
or at least at some point led his curiosity gene in this direction, because he wanted to see what this is all about. So I think the conversation was just like, "Hi, how's it going?" And then they saw Lethal Encounter, who is one of the primary founders of the EverQuest 2 emulator project, say something about ghost commands, because it was a system in EverQuest 2 that basically let you have an actor, and the proxy for that actor that basically processed all the information for them was called a ghost. So you'd update the ghosts, and they saw us talking about ghost commands. And actually, the only reason why we know what a ghost command is because the original list of opcodes were in the disassembly for EverQuest 2. Early EverQuest 2 actually included all of the netcode data on the client side in disassembly. And I didn't know this till much later when I actually learned, x86 assembly, because I was like, how did people know these opcodes? And that never was explained to me. I had to find that out on my own. But he was talking about ghost commands, and he says, "Ooh, spooky," because it's a system that this person had probably wrote. And just like he's talking about a system that he wrote with people who don't know what he wrote, and watching them figure it out. And I thought that was fascinating, that
Yeah.
someone would actually come in here and watch people take apart the game they really liked. I I just I thought it was so damn cool, actually. And so by that point, I started looking at other avenues, because I we were doing incredible work trying to get hype generated about classic EverQuest. We saw around the same time as projects like Project EQ, basically split off into Project EQ Classic, and then EQ Classic ultimately became the front runner for classic EverQuest emulation. Now, let me tell you a little bit about EQ Classic's history. You guys might know the Project Lantern guy, and that Project Lantern guy actually was originally involved in EverQuest Classic. And EverQuest Classic was an incredible, ambitious project that they'd try and get the original Trilogy client, which basically was a black box to a lot of people then, working in modern hardware with the um, basically modern hardware, old database, and then still use the classic client, which the classic client at that time was the Trilogy client. There's two versions of the Trilogy client. One had the 989 Studios logo on it. Another had the Sony Online Entertainment logo on it. They used the one with the 989 Studios logo because that was actually right before Luclin. The one with the SOE logo on it, of
Mhm.
course. And these are like CDs. They're like physical media that they would have to download, because we found out that one of the reasons why one of the earliest emulator projects at the time was shut down was Winter's War, and the reason they got shut down is because they were actually distributing the physical media of the game. So the idea then was, the only reason they want us to take this down is because we're using two things. Ultimately, we only thought of the client at the time, because the client is something you have to download from Sony Online, or you get it from the physical media, and the physical media is so you can speed up the process. Early physical media, for example, the EverQuest Trilogy client, ultimately contained all the information you needed to run EverQuest. Sorry, I just need to drink water.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So one of the earliest servers was shut down because they offered a patcher charge of delay, but they were originally called Winter's Roar, and They rebranded. Like this is like the Wild West of emulation too. This is like people were doing things that were unprecedented. There was no legal precedent for anything like this. To be honest, there still kind of isn't. Besides Nostalrius, and it's basically up to whatever um, team that's in charge of the game and what they want to do. For
Yeah.
example, for EverQuest's sake, they wanted to not shut these people down. They thought it was what they were doing was cool. John Smedley would actually intervene each time, as far as that's the rumor anyway. I never actually knew this for certain, but he'd basically go to his desk and he'd say, "Why are we suing these people? This is freaking cool. I literally like this." And then, but on the other spectrum is Blizzard, who is basically going to people's house, or Nintendo, who will literally hire a private investigator to go find out who you are, track you down, and say, "You shouldn't be doing this," like to your face, and then trapping you without your lawyer or anyone else present. They will hire a private investigator. Nintendo does this still, to go down to your house
Allegedly.
and say, uh, allegedly, yeah,
Allegedly.
because they'll go down and say, "Are you doing this?" to your face, and then they have camera rolling and everything, and you have to either make a decision to either talk with them or get your lawyer on the phone. And a lot of people just talk because the fact that Nintendo would spend all this time going down to your house means that they really want to fucking see you. And,
Allegedly. I don't.
allegedly,
I'm listening for like
allegedly,
my doorbell.
exactly. Um, so for Sony's case, it'd go to John Smedley's desk, and I really feel like I have to cough right now. I don't know why this is.
Because I
Because
keep
I'm coughing.
coughing. Am I making you cough? I'm sorry.
Sure. I don't know, but if I forced myself to, I figure it would help me talk.
Hmm. All right, I'm gonna mute. I'm gonna cough too.
Oh, perfect. I hope you muted on stream because I could still hear that.
Yeah, I muted it on stream.
Perfect. I didn't. I wish I did. Now
Ah,
everyone has my cough on record. Hope Nintendo doesn't find out.
no, I don't think we heard you. All right.
Oh, great. We were never here. Point being, they were taken down because they actually distributed the physical media, and they also used parts of EverQuest assets. So anything that had the logo, the official EverQuest logo on it, or anything like that, was not able to be displayed on these websites because that's copyright infringement. Same with the media; you can't distribute the binaries. Now, me as an engineer, now I'm thinking that's ridiculous. I read EverQuest.exe like it's or EQGame.exe like it's a Notepad document because I know so much about the game more than a lot of people do. But in reality, that's not going to hold up in court. What I think as an engineer is not going to hold up in court. Because at the end of the day, their specifics were, and the law states that you cannot distribute the executable at all. You shouldn't be doing that. That was the whole thing. Because that's their property. You can't. Same with the S3D zone files. One of the earliest things actually that EverQuest Emulator got in trouble with was during the release of Planes of Power. Someone leaked, I think it was someone at the Eternal Quest or something like that. There's someone before EQ Emulator that basically made a zone viewer, and that zone viewer could load Planes of Power S3D files. So we were seeing things like Plane of War, we were seeing Plane of Time, all before the expansion even came out. Basically, they went on the beta patcher, downloaded everything because it was just an XML file that told you where everything was. You didn't have to authenticate, and then they actually just viewed the zones, and it was a big deal
I
because you could
swear.
see all the
I
features ahead
swear.
of
I
time.
think I remember that.
Yeah, it was incredible actually because nothing like that. Like that was a big deal, because they weren't able to see everything before it's supposed to be launched. And I thought, and I think when all that happened, I was still coming out and playing EverQuest, and the fact that I saw this, that was like mind blowing that someone can actually do this. It was
Mm.
like I was like, oh man, those hackers have done it again. SourceForge got a cease and desist for that one. That was interesting. Image is would have knowledge of that. They predate me in this community. Um, actually, so yeah, there's a lot of legal issues that have presided this, but none of them actually had, historical references because nothing like EverQuest had ever been anticipated, or like nothing has ever been done like EverQuest prior to this point. So all of this was uncharted territory with a 3D MMORPG that has assets, that has a big intellectual property that ended up on the front of TV Guide or any of that really. And just wanted to give you a warning, we are reaching like 10 minutes
Yeah, I
to
see it.
the hour mark, and
Fine.
I'd like to keep going too,
Yeah,
but yeah, just wanna let you know.
keep on.
I honestly think it was really cool that, EverQuest became the central phenomenon and that right now all this uncharted legal territory was just kinda being explored. John Smedley, though, the fact that he recognized that these people are doing cool things, and his first, I guess his first impression was, "How do we get these people on our side?" I heard that later in industry, I'll go into that a little bit. Um, Basically, what I ended up realizing is all the stuff that I'm experiencing is uncharted legal territory. I am basically a pioneer in something bigger than myself, and that became a recurring thing. It's that I wanted to make myself like the champion of this thing or something like that. But in reality, that wasn't what I needed to do. I needed to work with people on these projects because that would help ultimately advance my goal of what I wanted to see, which was uh, it was a bunch of different things in between there. I wanted to see EverQuest Emulator eventually be a framework for young junior engineers, designers, etc.,
Mhm.
be able to be used so that they could actually learn how all of game development works before they enter industry. And I thought that was be a really cool concept because I'm learning things, that actual game developers use on a daily basis. SQL databases, these flat files that get loaded into memory. All these are just concepts that exist still today, just in different forms. You have instead of XML, we use JSON or YAML files. They're not just they're not just one thing or another. I mean, look at the web.archive.org. You see sourceforge.net planes. That
Mhm.
was the original Image and Solar EQ Emulator developers. And I guess that they had leaked all these zones that you had pictures of. So you could see like the plane of nightmare before it actually got uh, basically released to the public, or um, going back on here and getting off track. Sorry, I'm also out of breath. I might need a second.
Breathe.
Um, well, that actually feels weird having air in my lungs again. I think the interesting thing about EQ Classic though is that they were kind of the first people that really wanted to try classic EverQuest emulation. Obviously there was a couple like PQ, the Grand Creations attempted that by a guy that used to basically make the foundation for what would later become ProjectEQ.net, which
Mm,
is the open source database, meaning that anyone can download this database that contained EverQuest content historically until the time itself ends. And he was basically TCS My World was basically this guy who created that, or so I never actually found out if he was the one who started it or not. It doesn't really matter. The point is, this project existed, and people wanted to make a classic version of this. They saw these like expansion date marked releases because they wanted to make something that basically followed Live's progression. And so you had like the content up from Classic done. They'd make a big public release. They'd have the expansion done to Kunark and all the stuff that's in that, and they'd make a release. Of course, they'd have modern stuff sprinkled in there because they had to keep compatibility with newer clients. So they were basically, for a while, EverQuest Emulator was chasing Live. And some people said, well, what if we didn't chase Live? What if
right.
we just made the best era of EverQuest that we wanted? Because a lot of EverQuest and a lot of early EverQuest actually changed um, as the years went on. When it came from I'd say classic to Velius was basically I wouldn't say golden age because it was like an early age, but it was like one of the best moments that still kept the vision intact. I think
Yeah.
Bill Trust and Brad McQuaid's work was in full display there. Bill Trust apparently did a lot of the content early on, and
Mm,
um, his vision for that was, to have like a DQ mod style game in 3D. And it's very apparent when you look at stuff like Classic and Kunark, less so to Velius to some extent, because Velius really didn't was like the first expansion that really didn't include you know, early game content. It had like 35 plus stuff from, Eastern Wastes or Crystal Caverns. It had lower end content, but it really didn't include a starting zone. There was no cold aim to play. I thought that would have been cool if they did. But there was
yeah.
really no early game content. There wasn't a 1 to 20 area. There wasn't like a low level dungeon that's like 5 to 15 like Crushbone. It's the first expansion where they pretty much differed from that. And I'd say classic Cocoon arc really always had something like that.
Well, and
So when
it was a
Villain
bit of a finale. I mean, at
yeah,
that point, I don't think folks were really thinking heavily about, all right, what are the next 5 to 22 expansions going to be? It was just more,
yeah, they just looked in the moment.
and
What
then
was gonna
yeah,
get the biggest bang for the buck?
yeah.
And I realize that now. And, instead, what I've actually realized now is that it was actually pretty good design to some extent. When it started to get, too crazy, and you had stuff like Arms of War come out or, Gates of Discord is basically when I consider the game not catering to my playstyle anymore.
Yeah.
If I were to go to a Gates of Discord zone and solo as a druid, I'd have a hell of a time doing it. The thing would
Well,
resist my level 55 druid and
I was going to
go ahead.
ask you actually because you were describing, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow a minute ago when you were describing the essentially the technical side and you're learning about the emulator community and you're describing that. I was curious about you as a player and whether or not like was there still drive there in what you're doing to essentially cater to yourself as a player, or were you thinking strictly technically and
I was thinking, more of a player. I liked the creativeness of early EverQuest Emulator servers, and more so, I liked the idea that instead of going to, Gates of Discord or Almonds of War or any of these other expansions basically past Eldon that weren't catering to me, I wanted to make sure that I, as a player, had content that actually suited myself, and I mean, that kinda ties into my philosophy in general for game. I wouldn't make a game for right now unless I was paid that I didn't want myself to be able to play.
mm,
And
yeah.
every bit of content I make, like in Classless especially, was kind of an extension of a game I wanted to play. Problem is, I never would have time to play it, but at least I know that what I wanted from an early EverQuest perspective was a lot of what a lot of people wanted to see, because I've had so much experience, going through different types of gameplay. I think some of the later content in Gates of Discord catered to a different audience than mine, and I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I think that, there's a audience out there that wanted to waste 8 hours a day in Ookla, and I think that audience wasn't me. My audience, as in the people that I played around, were either going to World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy 11, or they were going to EverQuest 2, and I ended up in EverQuest 2 out of the 3. And,
How did how did you get from essentially that period into starting work on classless?
so Classless was actually relatively, a newer addition to it's basically gonna be, if I do another server, because 'cause I've done a lot of servers, okay? I'm really not okay with the amount of content I've made. I've always considered Emulator an extension of myself, and by proxy, sort of like a social experiment of sorts, especially with content I made. At first part, I was trying to learn what it would take to make something, and that was kinda like the early 2006 to 2008 days. I would join up with projects, I'd try and make my mark on them, and these are small projects, they're like maybe 50 to 100 people
Mm,
that would like 2 or $3, so it's not in actuality, it was like 10 to 15 people would actually play on these things, and that's fine. I mean, it allowed me to play with gameplay, and make something that is, like, completely out there. Give me 1 second, I need to Sorry, the cat alarm just went off. We feed our cats on specific hours. My
okay.
nestmate's got it. Um, but effectively, um sorry, where was I?
So
Um,
we're
Classless, right,
yeah,
and
we're
how
going
I
into
led into that.
classless.
So I would make servers, and they were kind of an extension of myself. I would use them as test beds to see what would work and not work. That's how I learned in general. I would try something, see if it works. If it doesn't work, I try something different. So to even that extent, I would just, use the EverQuest emulator as kind of like a way to test things, to see gameplay design that would work or not work. But I'm also learning engineering at the same time because if I need to do the things that I want to do in design and they're not something that is already readily made available for me, I need
Mm,
to be able to do that myself, and that's what kind of led me down the path of the generalist and as a programmer in general is because I started to become more in tune with making systems than actually making systems that that are actually creative. I just became more infatuated with the code underlying with the system than actually try to cater to players. And
Did
I
you
think that's go ahead,
did
sorry.
you find that so were you working on stuff like that more than you were playing other games at that point, or what was that?
I actually was. I
Yeah.
actually there's the times when I was looking at the current offerings for EverQuest 2, for example, when they released I can't remember what year this was, but Chains of Eternity. I've actually split my time 75-25 actually making games versus playing them because I actually loved tinkering. I got myself in pretty hot water when I decided to see if I could, access the EverQuest for Macintosh server. I was tipped off by Rogan, who was the lead administrator for Project 1999, that there's an EverQuest for Macintosh server, and I said, you know what, this would be pretty cool to look into. I looked into it, and then we kind of worked together because he's already using this DLL, which I'll get into the whole DLL injection thing a little bit. Maybe I should go into that first. Basically, I accidentally released something that basically killed the EverQuest for Macintosh server, and to this day, I'm not proud of it. In fact, it hurt me because I destroyed a world, a home that these people that played on EverQuest for Macintosh actually had. Um, if you look at Todd Schmidt's interviews, there's like this whole frozen in time community of EverQuest players that were in the era that I actually wanted to, recreate for a long time
Yeah.
because it was kind of like the golden era of my childhood. If you look at the timeline of when I started playing EverQuest, it was actually in the era that EverQuest for Macintosh was actually locked in. So that's massive nostalgia there for me.
Yeah, was that but how did that come to be? Like,
So, um, the EverQuest for Macintosh server was basically using the same netcode. It was basically as like the EverQuest Trilogy server that EQ Classic was trying to make, which had a lot of partial information basically related to the netcode and how it worked. The EverQuest for Macintosh server actually had symbols, and this actually was one of my first forays into assembly. There was a program called IDA Pro. I basically downloaded a copy of that and saw how things ticked in this game. And for the first time, I actually had insight on what these function names were. If I load up the EverQuest for Macintosh binary, um, even though it's like not x86 assembly in a traditional sense, it's more of a PowerPC assembly than anything else because that's what it was done in. I can still see the human readable function names for every single one of these functions that exist in the game client. And at that point, my brain just kind of blew up because I was like, I have function names in the emulator that do certain things, and all along, all this wasn't just I started to connect the dots a little on how machine code worked
mm,
and how compilers would translate things into linkable code and then linker into an executable. So I'm starting to see all the strings that control the system, and my mind is just everywhere. I'm like doing with CSI, like you know that scene in CSI where you're seeing numbers around your head and stuff. That was me just realizing that EverQuest for Macintosh is this simple to get working on a computer. So it actually turns out that there was an archive of executables for EverQuest that someone saved for years and years and years, and one of them was a 2003 January 15th binary of EverQuest, which had the same netcode as EverQuest for Macintosh, because that would be like basically right after Planes of Power had been released, and right after Planes of Power got released, that's also the time and the date of the code drop that Hobart basically gave to this third party company that made the translation um, layer to basically make a frozen in time version of EverQuest with.
mm,
It was never going to be updated. This company had basically maintained it on their own. And then later you see Todd Schmidt going in here like, I'm going to maintain this. These
yeah,
people are precious to me. And
yeah,
I thought that in itself was not only heroic, but what I wanted to do in the industry. But at that time, I didn't know it.
right.
Only thing I saw was, that I worked, for a portion of my life on all this preserving Classic when Classic was here all along, and I said, "Oh, why don't I just get a client that works on Windows for this?" So I used what limited knowledge I had to cobble something together that would allow a person to connect to the EverQuest for Macintosh server from a Windows client, and, that was basically, a DLL that, hooked certain functions of EverQuest that I had limited experience with DLL injection from Project 1999 when I figured out how to make the classic wolves and skeletons happen and make sure, that there was a way to disable certain windows. I gotta help Rogan piece that all together, and he did it himself, mind you. I didn't really have much experience with actually implementing it in a production environment. But at that point, um, it's like, this is something I can still do. So I did it for the sake of doing it. And at that point, I realized my actions have consequences because I didn't realize back then that I was actually doing harm. I only realized that I was doing something cool, not what the consequences of the cool thing I did were. So the consequence was a bunch of P99 players who are toxic, basically assholes, flooded this EverQuest for Macintosh server, and now instead of bridging the gap between people who love Classic and people who loved EverQuest for Macintosh, I've basically introduced a pool of toxicity that was unprecedented for the server, leading to the collapse and utter shutdown of it. And John Smedley wanted to keep the server online. I mean, but the moment they removed the subscription fee because they wanted people to be in there, like, for free to experience it, for whatever reason that was. I think it was because they were planning on sunsetting it because it's legacy tech. Um, but basically, because it was becoming a burden on the customer support side of things,
Mm.
I imagine they'd have to shut it down. There were people in there, and this version of EverQuest had a lot of netcode ported back to it, fixes specifically that Hobart had actually done. However, there were some things that still were not fixed, and to this day on EQ Live are unfixable just due to the engineering time requirement. I mean, I don't say anything's unfixable, but you have to weigh the cost versus benefit of actually
Right,
fixing
right.
things. So for things like allowing a level 1 character into the plane of time was a big deal because now this level 1 character can just teleport himself in there with hacks and go run around and train people. That's what was happening. Um, One of the biggest EverQuest for Macintosh guilds was now having these P99 players on level 1 characters that would need to get banned by a CSR in order to stop griefing people in the plane of time. And the only reason this person was doing it is because they were toxic to begin with to the EverQuest Project 1999 community that had come over to the server. And there's no way to stop these people because, that would take Todd Smith's time or it'd take a CSR's time to go in there and stop it.
It's like
So
this.
I didn't actually,
I'm
yeah.
picturing this Wizard's Apprentice moment. It's like, what have I done?
It's basically that. I mean, I hated a lot of what I did there, and there's no way to, go back on that. And I dealt with my own demons at that point because it was like I had all this knowledge. I wanted to do something amazing, and it's like, oh crap, I just let the floodgates into something that I really shouldn't have done. But actually, this is a turning point for two reasons. One, it highlighted the importance of emulation. All these issues that we were seeing could have been fixed with an open source community or even a closed sourced one that wasn't basically needing to be paid.
Mm,
If we could just avoid the whole fact that money is an issue here for Sony Online Entertainment, that means that this game could continue on indefinitely without intervention because there wouldn't need to be a paid intervention to go in there and fix the issues. People would just be motivated by the sole responsibility of seeing this game going,
mm.
for preserving the game. When you see emulation efforts just falter because the developer doesn't want them emulated, those are normally, IP issues because they want to be able to make a new version of whatever game they hold the IP to. I can imagine this is the case for Vanguard because the actual intellectual property is still loved by a lot of people. And if they ever
Yeah.
want to make a new Vanguard, they have to keep a hold of that game. And I didn't know that back then. I just considered everyone to just be jerks because that was the convenient answer for me at the time because I didn't know anything else.
How old were you during that period?
EverQuest for Macintosh, that'd be 2013, I think, 2014. So it wasn't that long ago. It was about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So I said mid 20s, early
Yeah.
20s, mid 20s. So, I mean, I'm 30 now, so that was like 22, 23. It
Yeah.
wasn't that long ago. So I had a lot of growing to do in a short period of time. And as an adult, they say your brain stops growing and you're never going to change your set in your ways after a certain age. I had to change because I knew what I was doing was destructive. And I was at least self-aware enough to know that my actions have consequences. Yeah, we were 23. May's the same age. I basically made Maze test a lot of this. Maze actually lived in New Jersey. He came up here one point, and we made an emulator, uh, cobbled together project at one point. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat in the background. I should probably give him some love.
No, yeah,
Um,
you don't have to apologize for cat sounds ever.
Oh, hey, easier
Pet
on me. I will
pets
not
are great.
apologize again.
But, I mean, you can
Um,
still give the cat some love. Don't let me stop you.
hold on. I'm gonna bring. Can I just hold on? Gotta get the fuzz kid on camera. Hey, Scruff. Oh, he wants to go outside. I do this thing where I actually just pick him up and just walk him around the perimeter of the house because he really enjoys that. But here, let's get Scruff in here. This is Scruff. He's one of two. The other cat's name is Tough. And here, we gotta see his opinion on all this. This is a fuzz kid at its finest. He
Mm.
is amazing. I love this kid. This kid is my lifeblood. And if someone were to ever harm him, I would be very sad.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is Scruff, and I love him. And he's going to want down now because he's wondering why I'm talking still. I don't normally do that while I hold him. But yeah, we got Scruff. That was Scruff. Tuff's around here somewhere. Uh, oh nice. Sorry. Things going around house. This is a crazy hectic house sometimes, but it's also the kind of level of chaos that's my life has been consistently. So I love it. Back on EverQuest for Macintosh and how that ties into what I was doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have that Xbox dev kit. I sent that back, by the way. I don't have that anymore. So I don't know if you guys know this, but actually, dev kits get lost to the wind sometimes when you're working on console games. Mine
Yeah.
almost did that,
Yeah.
and I was just like, I gotta get this back to its rightful owner. It doesn't feel right because people lose accountability of who has what, especially after companies fold. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna send this into the wind. I'm gonna send it back to the company I got it from, and just hope it gets there. I never got it back,
Yeah.
so that was
Sometimes
it.
that's a good move. That's a good move.
Because
There
I don't want a responsibility for having it.
yeah. That's good karma as well.
It is, yeah.
So during that period, were you working on was it only emulating EQ or were you emulating other stuff as well?
Actually, there was a lot of things I dabbled in. Mainly, there's a game that had its binaries leaked, and to this day, I actually feel really bad about this game because the reason that this game had private servers was also the reason it died. And I think there's a difference between clean room emulation and then actually just having the solution handed to you.
Yeah.
So this was a dark part of my life. I started to see a lot of things I really shouldn't have gotten into. And I think I attribute this to the reason why I actually wanted to learn assembly, actually, because a lot of these things required you to use assembly because these are pre-built games. Like during the free-to-play boom, a lot of Korean companies would actually send their binaries of games over to the United States for a publisher, like a client and a server, and then the publisher would just package it and send it over. For things for like Guns the Duel, which was actually one of my favorite games growing up. Funny how I found that. I looked in the Game FAQs, popular games list on Game FAQs. Um, there was a section where it showed you like the top 10 games for that week. Guns the Duel was in the discussion boards for there. So I was like, you know what? Let me go check this game out, and I fell in love with it. It's a Korean third-person shooter. Basically resembled the Matrix in a lot of way.
Yeah, it was super
There's
cool. We played that a bit when I was at Sony.
I actually thought that game was amazing, and there's a reason for it. It's because the animation canceling and the whole concept that you could just take animation canceling and turn that into a gameplay mechanic was mind-blowing. It was mind-bogglingly good. It was actually, to this date, one of the most high APM games that you could actually, interact with. And yeah, the leaked binary with debug headers, well, they had a whole PDB put in a client file in the Japanese version of the game, which led to that game's demise. And then another time, they sold the game to a Brazilian publisher, and that Brazilian publisher ended up leaking the entire binary online. And then in 2011, the game had its entire source code leaked on the internet because they were compromised by a Brazilian company. And to this day, I still feel like that was the defining moment of them not having anything anymore profitable. Um, just having private servers basically take over development of the game. There's so many things that when you have a game like that, creative minds want to do everything with that game.
Right.
And there's also a lot of people who don't want to do anything with it and just want to profit off of it. So that was actually my first experience with, people who program for profit versus people who program for the sake of the games they love. And for that community, they had a majority of interactions with, community members there that were developers, but they were developers who wanted to make a quick buck off of someone else's product. And that's actually where I draw the line, like, as a person. If I'm going to be making a buck off of someone's product, I at least want their permission for it, and I didn't feel right about that. The other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to do in that community was learn, because that's where my brain was driven. I wanted to do the best thing for that community that I could, because I know what they were going through. I didn't know, like, the full extent, because now I'm a developer and I know what would happen if, my game's entire source code was leaked onto the internet. It would be disastrous. It'd mean that the intellectual property would basically be held by a a an entity and then never released because it had some sort of value to it, even if the value was all over the internet. The fact that you were able to run the game legally in the country that you're hosting it in weighed more than at the actual, assets or code to the game, and that actually stuck with me for a while. That whole concept. Guns in general, though, that game was amazing. You could do anything with it. So my idea was, I'm going to try and do things that haven't been attempted before in this game. And this was before the source code leak of the game. I try and not touch things like that
Mm.
because I don't think it's right, because I know that led to the demise of it. For a while there, though, if you wanted to maintain competitiveness, so to speak, in their community, there are going to be people that actually touch the source code to it. So eventually, you'd have to touch something that you draw a fine line between.
Mm.
And to this day, I still haven't been able to find out where that line should be drawn, because there's some things that require you to touch that. And ultimately, I backed myself out of that because I don't agree in things that are not clean room emulation. Clean room emulation means that without any of the original game's files, you're able to reverse engineer and make a copy of, through emulation, the original server files, meaning that when the player goes to acquire your game, you're not going to keep any of the original assets. You're going to have the player do that on their own. And I think that's actually the approach that Lantern did. And ultimately, I feel like Lantern is going to be used, in a positive way, where they avoid legal issues and they allow people to edit the files that are originally in EverQuest. I don't know if they'll actually do this, but they're primed for it.
Mm. Yeah, it's really
Everyone
cool
is primed.
stuff.
I think it was incredible that they're making tools to edit these server or not server client files that previously even the original developers just swore off due to the amount of dev time it would take to actually get this done.
Yeah.
And the fact
It,
that they're actually doing what was deemed impossible, but it wasn't actually impossible. It was just not a good use of resources.
yeah, it's been super cool to watch. It's been very cool.
I love it.
I'm curious to see if something evolves there
I think
relationship wise with the
I think
company or something.
given what I know, given what I know about Lantern, and given what I know about EQ Classic's history with Sony Online Entertainment, I think their goal ultimately is to either present this in full to Daybreak and say, "Hey, look, we have a whole game based on the engine that you guys made that is actually functional. And with this engine, we'd like to make the best gameplay experience for your customers." And if I was a person that was in charge of accepting something like this, I'd say, why the hell did you waste all this time doing it, for one, not expecting anything in return? And then two, how much is it going to cost us? And that's going to
Right.
be the question. Because, if you present like Jennifer Chen and co all this information, they're going to be overloaded. They're going to probably first get their legal team on the phone and say, "Hey, what we should do about these guys?" And they don't have John Smedley there to make a decision like he would before. So
Mm.
I'd even approach that with a healthy dose of skepticism. I think what they're doing at EverQuest 1 and 2 is incredible. They're basically keeping a game alive in the form that players like to see, working with limited resources. But what if they had something like Lantern approach them? And I guess the problem then becomes, would it be financially viable for them to make something with Lantern? And I think if they approach them and they say no, then the effort for Lantern is ultimately wasted. So I think what Lantern is trying to do is, uh, EverQuest Classic got a cease and desist back in 2007, and I think that was one of the weirdest cease and desists I ever got. They basically send these out indiscriminately. EverQuest Emulator got apparently tons of them. The actual action they would take after that went to John Smedley's desk, and they said, "No, we're not going to take that action." And that's kind of where it ended.
Hmm.
And I still have a copy of that cease and desist. It was basically, I had it shared with me because at one point I worked with them.
Was
And I
it
was like,
signed by Andy?
it's signed by can't remember her name, but it was a woman's name. Can't remember her name. It was Basically, let me look.
Olivia?
No, not Olivia. There's another one. It was like a I'm trying to think because there's a
No, you're digging through
I'm
files for
digging
your
in.
cease
I'm
and
digging it.
desist.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at EQ Classic, has attachment.
Jeff Butler was promising us screenshots. You're promising cease and desists.
I know. I mean, that's just kind of how it was, though, and I think that's fine. It's from a LaserJet printer apparently. Laser has attachment. I think that's how I find it most of the time. So here's the person that signed it: Kelly Conway, Director, Legal and Business Affairs.
Okay,
She signed it. So,
cool.
um, yeah, I know it's cool.
Familiar
We're
name.
just casually talking about this on a stream, but yeah,
Uh, so all
it's
right.
too much time has passed, you know.
Going back, when I'd asked the question about other emulators, Warhammer
Yeah,
came up, and I've seen you. I've actually seen you playing
that one's an interesting one.
Warhammer.
I
So
love
I'm
that. I
curious.
love that game. So yeah, I was getting in the guns thing because this is going to lead into Warhammer. Warhammer is 100% clean room emulation project, meaning that when this was made, everyone had to contribute. There was a guy called Londo who started the project with a guy called Yalisla in I think it was like right after the game died, or right before it was about to die, like 6 months. They said, go in the game, packet collect a bunch of shit, and then we're gonna go and make this an emulator before this game dies and is lost forever. Without their effort of about, I'd say it was like what 10, 20 gigs of logs, just packets that going in between the client and server, they were able to restore the entire game world just strictly from packet collects and reverse engineering, which is incredible. And not only that, but they don't have any of the original code of the game in order to do that. So they had to sit here, make a C# application. The original game was basically C++. So they made it in a different language than the original server, and C# is normally notoriously underperformant. They made it performant. I'm going to try and find the video of it real quick and just link it in chat while I explain this. But Warhammer Online basically had a maximum of maybe 900 and something players at a keep at its peak, as in like when there was um like a peak amount of players playing the game in one location. They had like 900. That was the max that the server could theoretically handle, and they hit that during the game's like peak. Now this emulator project has just it's a closed source emulation project, meaning that they don't share their source code in public with anyone, meaning that you have to apply to join their team. I did apply to join it because I love this game. I thought the concept of RVR was one of the best concepts, even with Dark Age. I didn't play Dark Age. I'll be honest. I didn't find it appealing, mainly because I found it after I found EverQuest 2, and by that point, the camera control basically turned me off from it.
Mm.
Um, so Warhammer was like my experience with RVR, not the 3 realms, but the 2 realm version that Warhammer Online had. And now with this game emulator called Return to Reckoning came out, it was basically the live project for WarEmu. As time went on, they realized that there were a lot of people out there that wanted to sabotage them just because they wanted to be the one to do it. And to this day, you know, there's people like Max Heyman, who is basically one of the original people that started working on it, who have just advocated for people that honestly did need advocating for, because there's a lot of people that have entered this project basically with zero knowledge, and he taught them all he needed to know. For me, I came in here with a little bit of knowledge in 2017, which is about 3 years after their project had been established. During that time, I was just playing the game casually as a player. I said, you know what, I'm gonna try this because I'm good at EverQuest. I'm good at Guns to Duel. I'm in an industry. I have worked for a year on a customer support in a or a year or two customer support and then a programmer for this. I'm gonna come in here as a superstar and do everything. And then I just realized I don't have time for this. When you're working professionally in industry, you rarely have time to do anything. Fortunately, I didn't actually have a reason to, leave my mom's house yet. I left my mom's house in 2018, much after I should have actually left my mom's house. Like I was a grown adult living with my parents basically, and I'd resigned myself prior to getting the job in industry for actually ever leaving my mom's house. I was planning on letting her die there, and then I'd take over the house when I'm like 40. I'd basically be what was that movie called involving a 40-year. Anyway, Point being, um, I went into I went into Warhammer expecting I can save this project. They have a lot of progress to go, and I want to make sure they complete it. I want to
Right.
make sure they get the city sieges in. I want to make sure they do the fortress attacks. I want to make sure we can do everything this game didn't do while it was still alive, for technical reasons or otherwise. Because realistically, all the issues Warhammer Online had were either balance related, uh, netcode related, or some level of performance regarding the big fights related. So
Right.
my job was I had a lot of experience working on the client side from EverQuest, from Guns, and on the server side from EverQuest, and from professional industry and experience on top of all my emulation experience. So I figured I'd take this in here, and then there's about maybe 500, 600 people playing at the time. And I'd go in here and I'd say, I'm going to make this the best experience these people could ever have again. And I did. I mean, I did. I got in there, I started giving people hope. I'd work with the riffraff of the community. I'd basically stand up for people that weren't getting stood up for. And I think it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, professionally or otherwise, except for the fact that, I'd have to put a lot of my mental health to the back burner while I'm dealing with a lot of people in there who did not want to see certain changes happen to the game.
Right.
And around the same time, one of the games I worked on professionally, Hawken, was kind of going through the same thing.
Okay,
We were trying to
I
figure
was
out.
about to ask because you mentioned you were working in the industry at the time, and I assumed that's what you're talking about, but I didn't want to like
Yeah,
out anything
I
unless.
worked on APB Reloaded as a customer support agent first.
Okay.
That was interesting, because for the first time, in all of my life, I was actually working on a game professionally. I might have made $10.25 an hour, but I was working on a game, and that was cool to me because I finally had a job. My job experience prior to that was working at Spencer's Gifts for $9.25 an hour, and $9.25 an hour. So going to actually work on a game remotely from my house without having to go to an office in itself was mind blowing to me. I thought that would never happen. This is 2015 before COVID, by the way.
Well,
The
and
fact that I was
that's
actually,
pretty fantastic. I'm not gonna lie. I mean,
I never, no one actually ever dealt with remote work except for the very few chosen few. Do you remember Star Wars Galaxies? Right, they had a
yeah.
community manager, Diane Migalacio. She was also known as Tiggs.
Mhm.
She was actually the person I reached out to at Gamers First about getting a job. Well, she reached out to me. We had a bunch of undesirables at that point that were that was the quote, or she called them wig nuts, but I'll use the word undesirables that were hacking the game. They were harassing her in person. They were sending. This is around the same time Lizard Squad was doing their thing, and Lulsec had tried to take down half the internet. All these other big hacker gangs, and everyone felt empowered because there's no legal precedent over, consequences for these types of actions. Well, there is now, and at the time, I was like, I'm gonna take this a step further. I'm going to, try and infiltrate these groups because I have nothing else to live for. I had no industry experience by this point. I should have had something by now. Mental health was at an all-time low. I'm gonna go talk to these people, and I'm going to, try and find out who they are because they're sending death threats to someone's daughter online that is just trying to work their job. And I couldn't stand that. I did not actually like any of that. So I reached out to her and I said, I could probably find out these people. I start giving her information about whom they might be, who they might not be, and ultimately, what I found out is that I befriended one of them, and they were actually in the same situation. They wanted to actually help this company. They were like one of the biggest cheat creators for the game, APB Reloaded at the time. They wanted to actually, help this game in some way, but they reached out and they felt rejected,
Mm.
dejected, and to the point where they were looking at different historical instances where hackers were approached by games, and it, it turned out actually they didn't really actually want to arrest this person. I wouldn't have learned that till much later, but because they felt like rejected by them and weren't given a fair opportunity to work with them, they'd have to go in person, and then they were going to charter a flight for him. But by that point, he was worried that this person is going to. I'm basically going to get off the airplane, and then there's going to be FBI agents ready to take me in for the crimes I've committed against this game because of the hacks I made for it. So my perspective was, I'm going to take that risk because I've talked to these undesirables, and I think this one isn't quite as bad as the others because there's some that were just actually deliberately malicious. They were sending death threats, sending bomb threats. They were going around with cheats in the game, but none of them actually made the cheats. There's this one guy who actually made the cheats that I knew was a cut above the rest. The others were just trolls. Effectively, they were trolls, but they were smart. They're smart enough to avoid detection. Some of them, not so much. The ones that didn't ended up. I think there was like this weird sort of investigation that went on. I had no info or insight on it because it wasn't my business.
Mm.
But I made it my business, and that's what led to uh, her actually reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, do you want a job? You're basically doing the thing you would do at my job anyway." I was like, "Sure." So I got hired on as this customer support rep, and it's just for a year there, I was just working there. And I figured if this is my big break, and they're hiring me because they know I have or not non-industry programming experience, I'm going to make sure I do this customer support job with flying colors.
Yeah.
And I ended up doing that actually. Um, and it was great because about a year later, I got hired, and this is unprecedented in my life. I got hired. I got swapped from 10.25 an hour to 25 an hour working on Hawken. And Hawken was an amazing game. And I'm trying to just try and not say too much about that project, but Hawken was an amazing game. I loved it. The
Yeah.
community was amazing. They deserved a lot more. And I put whatever, insight I had on EverQuest Emulator into Hawken. And for a while there, I mean, that's what I did. I just programmed. I programmed and programmed and programmed. Hawken on console basically released with the same level of reviews that it did on PC. There was mixed reviews, and that was it. But I actually made my mark on a game, and I think that was incredible. And I wish I could continue doing that. So I did. I kept trying until I couldn't try anymore. So one thing led to another. I started getting more stressed. That's a recurring theme with me is mental health. I've never actually been able to, focus except when I feel like I'm making an impact.
Mm.
And that's actually a big part of the industry that I just haven't been able to wrangle so far as, separating my work and life. Because when I actually dedicate myself to a project like this, I have a hard time stepping away from it. There are times that I'm like, hey, could I work the weekend? I'm really having a good time here working on this. And then eventually it just became just don't tell anyone else you're doing it and you can go work on the weekend. So I did. And eventually, Hawken, if it had not been for me looking into the physics library right before launch, it would have launched with 20 frames per second on a console, and I didn't feel it was acceptable. And I spent the extra time and effort into optimizing it. The game got launched at least had 50 frames per second, 60 on a good note, and then the game launched to critical well, not critical acclaim, but if we had launched it with 20 frames, it would have ended up really terrible. So Hawken
Right.
launched with 50 frames, and that was my impact that I can make on that game. It wasn't something you'd actually notice in the game. It wouldn't just scream secrets, but it would at least scream enough that people would be able to enjoy it more than if it had been
When
just
you
neglected.
when you put that kind of focus into your work, though, is it sustainable or does it?
I think it eats at me a little bit because the more I end up in failure, the more it eats at my mental health. And again,
Yeah.
this is a referring thing with my mental health. I have a hard time separating myself from work to this day. You can ask my nestmate.
Yeah.
There's times when I'm just, it does start to become. It makes you wonder the question: when is the appropriate time to work,
Mm.
and when is the time to not work? Because you're end up, sometimes I do like to play video games. When do I play them? If every day of my life is going to be work, and
Right.
it does start to, make you feel like you're doing something wrong. Which,
And I guess that's what I'm hitting at, right? It's like
yeah,
it's finding some sort of tools to maintain a little bit better balance because I know that
I'll tell you
feeling
what
when
helped
it's
me
like
out
you
the
just want to
most.
focus and focus and focus, but then
Yeah.
you're not catching yourself if you're burning out, right?
Yeah, and burnout is a big thing that I've had to manage. I have to manage my expectations of what I want from what I do. And the best way to do that lately has just been taking a step back and saying, it's okay to go pet my fuzz kids. It's okay
Yeah,
to go
exactly.
feed yourself during these work hours. I'm at home. I have this whole house around me that I can do stuff with. But there's also a time and place where I need to focus and actually get shit done.
Yeah.
And so the best way I've been able to do this is time boxing. At my last company, the CTO had basically said, time box your stuff. See where
Yeah.
your time is actually going. For a while there, I did that, and it actually worked. And I continued it to some extent, lesser extent, as time went on, because I realized the more I actually wrote down what I was doing, I had accountability for what I was doing. Eventually, I didn't really need to do it as much, or at least just, even doing something like writing a daily report to your superior or, whoever you're writing to gives the rest of your team it helps more than just yourself because you're helping yourself actually manage the time. You're helping your teammates that are working remotely with you, if any. There's times when I've just been the only one on a project. So you're helping your teammates, if any, manage their time. You're helping your the people who pay you understand what you're actually paying you for. And
Right.
transparency and honesty is actually one of the best things that you need while working remotely. If you tell people, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna get this done then," and it doesn't get done, that doesn't look good on you.
Right.
And so you need to actually have um basically accountability for every single one of your actions. Not only does that show like a level of professionalism from yourself, but also shows like confidence if you say you're going to do something and then you actually end up doing it. Especially during the era of remote work, there's experiences you can only get in person. For example, I would say that artists and creative minds, such as designers, will actually struggle remote compared to working in the office with the artists and the other creative minds that are working on the game. I say something like engineering, you keep all the engineers on one side of the planet, and then you keep all the engineers on the other side of the planet, or the artists and the creative minds, the studio heads, basically in isolation. I think that's the way to run a company, because realistically, your engineers need to be able to lean over and say, "Hey, uh, Fuzz Kid over here, who's actually just staring at me, wondering why I'm talking. Can you help me with this project? Can you
Yeah.
help me with this problem that I need to actually understand?" And I can't do that working remotely. There's like, "Hey, got a time for a call?" And those words would actually later go on to haunt me because like, "Hey, got time for a call? 10, 15, 20 minutes? Oh, yeah, sure. Let me just get right on that." And meanwhile, I'm having to find something else to do with my time because I'm now blocked.
Right.
The fact
Right.
that I can't talk to this person about what I need to do means that I'm blocked. But as time went on, I realized there's other things I can do with my time that are still productive to work that do not involve, waiting on a call. And that's something that's very important for remote work.
So,
So,
I'm curious the impact. So as you're ramping up in the industry, you've got more industry roles. How's that impacting your like? How are you balancing it against your emulator work?
so the
Um,
emulator work I've actually put mostly to the back burner.
yeah.
There's occasional times where I just go over to it and I'm just like, "Hey, you guys should do this instead of this," because sometimes you just need to ask the right questions to people. For example, in EverQuest Emulator, there's a person now that I've basically casually been mentoring, and for the entire time, they were ready to swear the entire emulator off. They got banned for trying to contribute something and were aggressive towards a contributor that maintains and approves the pull requests. And they said, "Well, I'm going to swear this thing off because me and my friend just got banned for this." I said, "Dude, why are you trying to worry about what other people are telling you you can and cannot do?" I had that happen to me the entire time. Yeah, it Splows actually, and we even went it got me and Splows even went into it before, and I actually said, "You know what? I'm sorry for doing that because one, I have temper issues. I need to get that worked on. I have actually anger management classes coming up." And it's like, yeah, Splows got banned for just trying to contribute, but he did it in a way that was aggressive. And so I said, "You know what? Focus on that because I got banned because I did things on emulator that I shouldn't have done." And instead of, I didn't have a secrets at the time to tell me things can still be done. You don't need publicity. You don't need access to anything but the ability to pull down the code. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be the main proprietor in whatever you want to pursue. Just because you can't give back doesn't mean your career is over. It means
Right.
that you can still process whatever was told to you in a different way. And for and yeah, as Captain Malcolm High Secret's been wearing a path on the carpet, he's very nervous. In fact, here's Scruffy. It's Scruffy, I think. It's him and Tuffy. They go play a lot, but also, yeah, I think they're kind of nervous that I'm not paying attention to them. But yeah, like what
So,
Mace is saying, I used to have secrets to all my commits. That's because sometimes I knew how to talk to people, and basically learned how to talk to people. Go ahead, sorry.
um, I was gonna ask. I played Classless 3.0. I didn't play the previous incarnations, but I had a lot of fun. Like the brief amount that I got on and played. Uh, how long did it take you to get to that iteration? And
Um, so that's actually an interesting proposition or question. It's not a proposition; it's a question. Um, the question it could just be best answered in that I've tried to make Classless 2.0 my magnum opus. Classless 1.0 was actually a concept called EQ Battle Royale. I just put people in there with this preemptive skill sets. And eventually, I just decided, that's going to be too hard to do. I was going to make people pick a template for an enchanter or a paladin or a shadow knight. I said, you know what? Why don't we just let people pick the skills they want? And then put them in a PvP environment on the TAC client. That didn't work, actually. Classless 1.0 was actually a result of me realizing that my original design didn't work. So I said, you know what? Why don't we just turn off PvP? Because PvP started, and then people would start complaining about getting griefed or they couldn't leave the spawn area. And I was like, I don't want to deal with all this. I want this thing to be self-sufficient because I'm already working in industry. I'm trying to get shit done in my spare time. And what I said to myself is, if I'm going to do this again, it needs to run itself. Anything that I do on EverQuest needs to run itself because I'm not going to have time to actually reach out to each and every individual player. Because at that point, I was just like, you know what? I need to be responsible for myself. I need to keep myself away from other people because if I try and hire a GM or an administrative type figure, I'd have to have accountability for them and their actions. And I didn't trust most of the people at that point for various different reasons, mainly
mm,
because I like to do everything myself and have complete creative control over things. Um, so I think I brought Maze on there to help me with it. So yeah, Classless 1.5 was ROF2 and had the RC Race Car Guild in it. Um, so basically, by destroyed, it means we left that client. It wasn't going to suit our needs, even though I had done a lot of work for it. It just wasn't ready. There was a lot of problems with the TACP client related to device acquisition, being like keyboard and mouse acquisition as you tabbed in or out. People were seeing repeated inputs. There's bugs. There's problems, which were fixed, by the way, in the latest TACP. TACP is actually a great project, by the way. It's EverQuest for Macintosh, but on an emulator. It's meaning that eventually that is going to become completely open source. Probably a year after their plan is a year after they complete the Planes of Power expansion, after people have had time to actually play on it. That's going to be completely open source, and you're going to see the fruits of their work combined with my work, combined with everyone that has ever contributed to that project's work, all in one location, and you'll be able to download it and start up your own EverQuest for Macintosh server, so it will be preserved for all time, which is an amazing concept, actually. The fact that someone can now, 20 years in the future, download a copy of this game, the code, have a proper operating system and such to run it, can still play it. I still can play EverQuest for Macintosh on a Power PC. Like, the original Power PC client still works on EverQuest for Macintosh on our emulator, just
mm,
because we actually cared enough to put it in there. So, Classless, for example, was going to be an extension of that I could put a little bit of myself into. Ultimately, it didn't work out. I found that people found flaws in the original design. There's a lot of problems, and I ultimately shut down because there was no way to accountably just find all these issues. People are summoning cleric hammers, for example, onto their characters and giving them to level 1 alts, which basically made the leveling process trivial. So we'd have to level restrict that. And eventually I decided playing whack-a-mole with this isn't going to be great.
right.
Eventually we made Classless 2.0, which is actually originally Elia, a friend of mine, who was actually very incredibly smart and talented mathematically, uh, reached out to me. We had just met. Basically, one thing led to another, and I found out that they were working on the City of Heroes emulator. And then I saw their name. We were like, "Holy shit, you've been here all along?" And they're like, "Yeah, where the hell have you been?" So basically, Alia reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to make another EverQuest server? It's been a couple of years." I said, "You know what? you're the only person in the world that I'd feel comfortable making a completely new server with because of your talent. And I have all this new knowledge. Let me show you. So with the DLL and knowledge and reverse engineering, um, server architecture knowledge, coming off of just having made Warhammer Online super successful, meaning that they just had Warhammer Online had just had about 2,000 clients in the same area or something ridiculous like that. I think it was like 1,200 players uniquely in the same area on the Warhammer Online emulator. So I was feeling great about myself. I said, you know what? Let me bring back everything I've learned to EverQuest, the game that I really loved. And so we did. Initially, we started out with a concept called Edge's Insanity. Edge was like our duo server from back in 2007. It was kind of like an like it was basically a homage to the naming of our original server. Edge 2.0 was basically a server where you'd kill creatures, and instead of getting just levels, you'd get stat points as well. And you would basically convert AAs into stat points. When you turn on your AA slider, you'd get stat points, and you could turn on that slider from level 1. So you would gain AAs, and then you spend them in addition to whatever level you were. The level
Mm.
was there specifically so that you could actually just level your character and get new spells. And the spells would scale with the stats, and you could buy the stats from the AA point vendor. Edge was actually really cool. So eventually, what we found out is that shamans were actually the strongest in the Edge formula because you basically had access to every single shaman spell in the game, and all of them, guess what? They buffed stats. So the design ultimately didn't work because we'd have to nerf shamans or at least gut the class. So we're like, okay, so what if we were to take classless and then instead of having the old EverQuest formulas dictate what you can do in the game, we just take a new perspective, take what we learned on Edge's Insanity. Edge's Insanity was basically a dungeon crawler game. You'd go into only instance content, and you would take like 6 other people, and the dungeon would scale with you infinitely. It would get progressively harder. You could actually think of like Mythic Plus from World of Warcraft, except with infinite scaling. And because it basically used logarithmic math, it was basically a cookie clicker game on steroids, which actually Classless 2.0 was also a cookie clicker game on steroids. Eventually, Classless 2.0 got to the point where you realized your stat choices really didn't actually matter, and you can make different builds with different stats, but ultimately, no matter where you specialize too much in crit, your haste would get slower. You specialize to haste, you would crit less frequently. So no matter what you did, mathematically, the game was basically the same. Um, so Classless 2.0 was basically, we decided that there's going to be no cap. You would scale infinitely. You get to level 250 if you had enough time to put into the game, which ultimately sounded great on paper, but in reality, the only interesting content that people actually found in Classless 2.0, at least personally, was the raid content we made, which we'd take like classic EverQuest raid content. For Nagafin, for example, you would take him, but we'd add like custom twists to it. So people went in there to Nagafin when we released it and were like, "Oh, you know what we're gonna do? We're just gonna go up to that boss and beat him because he's just got stats. He's just a big beefy stat boss." So I remember releasing Nagafin for the first time, and then people running up to this boss and having to figure out gameplay mechanics, and this just blew everyone's minds because they didn't actually understand the fact that this thing had mechanics. They all got an ability called Claw Implosion used on them by Nagafin, and right after Claw Implosion, if you didn't get out in the next 3 seconds, you'd be dead. He'd summon you all to him. He'd summon the entire zone of players to him, and then he would just instantly just gib basically anyone in his close proximity if they were still in proximity when Claw Implosion was used. But he would only do this basically in melee range. So if you ran too far away, he wouldn't actually hit you. So this kind of early EverQuest content mixed with new, Final Fantasy 14 style mechanics was incredible for people. They had to figure out the fights, and this was not really something you'd ever expect from early EverQuest. So it threw a lot of people off, and we had a lot of fun. A lot of people were saying, "Well, these fights are really easy. We can just ignore the mechanics." So there's like another thing we did because we started to realize people are just going to try and heal through this claw
Mm.
implosion mechanic. So we tried something different for Vox. Vox would spawn. They think we're just going to zerg down this entire boss, and Vox, instead of charming all the players in the game, or instead of pulling all of them in, they charm them. And charm on Classless 2.0 had a different mechanic. it would make a copy of whatever characters that currently got charmed. And we also, for Vox, Classless 2.0 had a system where you could have multiple pets, if you remember that. So we could have multiple of like the earth, fire, but for NPCs, they didn't have a limitation on the amount of pets they could have. If they had different pet spells, and we specifically flagged the charm spell that Vox would do, it would, instead of having an AoE fear like Vox would normally have, they'd have an AoE charm. So everyone was expecting to just go in here, zerg the crap out of this thing, and then kill it. Unfortunately for them, they zerged the crap out of it, and the guild that was actually doing content with less numbers had an easier time with it because they could just handle the fact that there was a bunch of copies of the player that much easier. And then we also, of course, purposefully put in a cheese mechanic of you could either AoE stun these. They weren't like non-crowd controllable
Right.
creatures, so you could just stun them, for example, or you could just basically just stop them from attacking your group just by using, for example, the Bard AoE lull or Mez rather. Bard could just AoE Mez, and then the mechanics are trivial because everything was like less than 55. So you could just Mez them, and then after that, you would just be able to do the encounter real easy. And people figure that out, but they didn't know that for going in that. When this content first released, they were like, I'm just going to go Zerg down. It's probably something like a Nagavan. Nagavan was enough to throw off, but they're like, how cruel could it actually be? And then watching this entire mega guild that basically recruited everyone just flop over in front of Vox was one of the most hilarious highlights of game design for me.
Were they perfect copies, or did it just
They
spawn sort
they
of
were
a pet?
they were perfect copies with the spell list of the thing that it made a copy of. So it had all of your spells too.
Nice.
So if it had complete heals, you'd basically be fighting an army of yourself. Vox herself wasn't actually that hard. It was the copies you had to basically deal with. And
That
then
was the intent. Like when I did the curse cycle, there was a AOE there was a AOE
charm,
charm
yeah.
as well, and that I mean honestly that was the idea. Is like picturing all these just wonderfully well equipped people just turning on
Great.
each other.
Yes. And I loved that concept. Actually, that cursed fight was the inspiration for
Oh yay!
what I did. So the other fight that I want to mention, there's one more that I wanted to mention. I know these sound like ridiculous things. Was when a guy called Showtime in our Discord. I can't remember his actual character name, but he was like we could beat anything you throw at us. I think him, Maze, and a couple other folks had gone into this, and then we decided to make it a mechanic. Yawgmoth, that was it. He went into the plane of hate, and for he's expecting to just face tank Inaruk. And I watched his guild try and do this. I was like invis next to him, watching his guild try and do it. And I was listening to his chat because they had most of the guilds had also voice chat in our Discord. I was just sitting in there watching them, trying to figure it out. We had made 2 invis Shadowmen NPCs with the name Pain and Suffering that would just wail on you and spawn 30 seconds into a fight, and every 30 seconds you'd get another copy of Pain and Suffering on you. They wouldn't walk very fast, but Pain and Suffering would continue to like go in your general direction, and then they just march there. And if you let too many copies of Pain and Suffering get up to you, and you were doing something like Yawgmoth was doing, which is tanking them in a corner, they'd eventually just murder your tank, and there's nothing you can do. And people were sitting there wondering, what the hell's going on here? What are we going to do? And part of the actual design choice for that is because I noticed people were thinking that they were smarter than the developers, and honestly, that's fine to do. I prefer that. I prefer people to think outside the box. And the fact that we got people thinking was honestly a design success. The fact that people were expecting one thing to go one way and then having it go another was great. And then on top of that, you had this the strategy for that one was eventually just making pets. And the Zerg guild that initially had issues with Vox was actually doing great because they could just kite this thing indefinitely for days. So the people that thought they were smart doing things with lesser numbers also were becoming overconfident in the same way that the big guild was.
Mm.
So having these 2 guilds that were in isolated environments competing over content made me feel very happy when I realized that both of these designs had things that would counter, both strategies of having a Zerg guild and having to figure things out. But ultimately, both of these people on their server, both these major guilds would ultimately have to use their brain, and that was the intention with the design.
Cool.
So yeah, so Dolan, I think Nilbog actually mentioned that to me. I have your executable archive. I have your website history archive. I think he sent that to me on a GitHub link or something like that. I'm still very much in tune with all the people that make classic EverQuest happen. For example, Torvin. Oh man, can I just take a moment to talk about TACP for a moment? Like,
Sure.
do you mind?
No,
Um, t-
not at
uh,
all.
Torvin was actually one of the few people that got into emulator development simply because of my HUMAC hack. And without that man, we would have been all this information on EverQuest for Macintosh, and honestly, almost every single in-era mechanic from 2002 would have been lost had it not been for him getting involved in emulator. He loved the gameplay mechanics of EverQuest more than anyone else did. Um, some of his work is on EverQuest emulator itself. Um, and you can look in the development section here. He has basically modeled the entire um, EverQuest spell data routines, basically from pseudocode, just developer mentioning, and then he spends like months at a time just on the EverQuest live test server because a lot of these stats didn't change, just the way in which they're interpreted did. For example, armor class. They've changed the AC formula, I think, like 2 or 3 times. Once with adding the soft caps, and then they changed the soft caps around, of course, but and then 2013, they changed the model for which AC is modeled. And then they exposed, of course, different values to the client and such. But ultimately, the actual value that stays on the server was generally the same for each mob. And he was able to model all this basically it, he basically made a script that would parse log files and output all this information. For example, how hatred works in video games, or specifically EverQuest,
Right,
like
right.
the hate list logic. He'd actually model all this stuff to the point where I think at one point Brad McQuaid actually sent me an email asking about this because he was really impressed and wanted it for Pantheon. And to this day, I still have that email in my inbox because I consider Brad McQuaid like childhood hero status, and he still kind of is. Bill Trust, him, John Smedley, these are people that are incredibly important to my early development and why I still have an interest in games to begin with. I think that's really important to recognize. And I gotta be honest, I never knew Brad beyond a couple emails, but his death kind of shook me up, man. I I I legitimately cried knowing that he was struggling with so much and hearing the Eli Droth interview. That I gotta be honest, that could have been me if I had not had, um that could have been me, just losing my shit and going into depression and spiraling down and struggling with things. All I ever wanted to do with EverQuest is just, recreate it or make my own experiences with it. And the fact that what Brad McQuaid actually dealt with over the years with the abuse he got from his fans, but also the praise he got from his fans, it led you to like wonder, is he gonna be really able to trust anyone? And I to this day, it still haunts me what actually happened with Brad McQuaid because I think he was one of the most talented people alongside Bill Trust and John Smedley for actually making sure this thing happened. And I think it's incredibly important to just emphasize that his death was critical for me. There's a time in my life where I felt exactly the way that Eli Roth explained Brad McQuaid's feelings to me, and it
Well,
was
yeah, and I think a lot of people fall into that. It's I think it's helpful that it's a topic that more people are able to be open about, but it's definitely one of those ones that's I think a lot of people deal with, right?
yeah, imposter syndrome coupled in with existing like self-worth value issues. That's what I
Mm,
deal with personally. I always feel like I'm not good enough for what I'm doing, and honestly, my work quality sometimes suffers because of that, because I can't do the best because I'm not believing in myself, and that's
yeah.
something I struggle with constantly. So hearing things like Brad McQuaid struggling and actually being as generous to give people like Doug Cronkite $12,000, no questions asked, that just is a testament really to the character that Brad McQuaid is and was. And I think that's incredibly important to note that there are people like out there like that. And I want to be, when I get like rich and famous, so to speak,
Mm,
if I ever make it like that, that's the kind of things I want to do for my friends. The people that actually got me there, the communities that got me there. And I really wish there's a way to get that process accelerated, but there's not. I got to start doing the work. That's what I
Yeah.
came down to myself and said. Um, Brad McQuaid basically touched a lot of people's lives, and the whole mm, eh, thing of people making fun of Pantheon for having problems with development and such. That was just that's got to be crippling for someone like Brad McQuaid to have to go through. And in hindsight, yeah, I was a little shit back then, but actually seeing these interviews, I regret everything and anything that I've ever said about Pantheon, especially seeing those interviews. I still struggle with, going off the rails sometimes, but that's everyone. But
Yeah.
I can't let my anger or, concern or any of that just impact other people's lives. And I think that's very important. That goes back to like EverQuest from Macintosh. That goes for any project like EQ Classic. When I left them to go to join Project 1999, that actually must have hurt the people that I was working with. Just saying, you guys can't do this. I'm going to go somewhere else that I thought could. That's important to that's important to note that I actually can recognize and process what I was doing to people. And I think
Yeah.
that's something a lot of people that are fans of, EverQuest and then later became disenfranchised with Pantheon should realize. There's actual people that you're affecting there too. That doesn't mean that they're infallible, but it doesn't mean they should hate on them for that. I mean, there's no they're the same people. They're just trying their goddamn best sometimes with what they have
It's
to work with.
it's good to recognize and acknowledge it, process it. Don't sit on it. Don't dwell on it.
Yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
don't
Like,
I can't. I mean, I can't if I dwell on the things that I've happened in the past. I'm never gonna worry about what's going to happen in the future. I can't solve them now, and that's become a recurring theme lately. I need to solve what I need to do now. If I don't resolve what I need to do now, all that things that I want to do in the future are not going to happen, and all the things I've done in the past are not are going to haunt me. And there's nothing I can do about the past. There's nothing I can change about the future. Right now, in the moment, and for the near short term future, I got to be able to do the things I can do for the people I care about. And that's it.
that's that's it.
I mean, there's nothing much more to say. It's just I gotta do the best I can.
Yeah. No.
So anyway, uh, in terms of I'm just apologizing in advance. This interview is going to be all over the place when it goes to YouTube. Uh,
No. 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 No.
this is a lot of interesting insight because you don't actually get to see this from the people that work in these emulator communities, especially when you're in industry and
Yeah.
you're basically told, oh, these people are just ripping you off, or for I went into an interview for Sony Online Entertainment. I'm going to touch on this briefly because I met one of the most important people there that I would ever meet. Two people actually. One would be Nandersatz, incredibly talented person. Um, Told me a lot of things up front that I needed to hear, and some things indirectly that I needed to hear. Um, Basically, I applied there in 2013, and that interview haunted me for a while there. I thought, I'm starting to learn stuff in Emulator. I should be able to do this for a living. But what I didn't anticipate at the time is that I had no industry experience. I felt betrayed actually going to that interview for a lot of different reasons, but also it was an important betrayal because it wasn't actually a betrayal, it was a life lesson. And that's why I got to take things like that. I met him and Holly Longdale. Holly Longdale, sure, she'll get a lot of crap for, being around the Georgeson era, and um, I actually really liked her at the interview. I talked with her. She seemed genuinely interested in, maybe not the same thing that the hardcore fans were into, but she still rated. She still played the game she's working on. She still tried her best with what she had. And you look at the interview with EQ Next and what they were trying to do with that. That was a overly ambitious project, but if there's anyone that could have pulled it off at that time, it would have been those guys, and I would
Mm.
have liked that.
Secrets. We have a question
Sure.
from Plurp. And it says, kind of a broad game design question here, but curious about both of your thoughts. One of the problems that a lot of MMOs run into is balancing the complaints of old time slash degenerate players versus adding new content to attract new players. For example, Path of Exile has a constant tension between balance for people who play 24 hours a day and more normal players. How do you guys think about this?
I think that is one of the hardest things you have to recognize as a game developer I think I talked about this earlier yesterday. You're gonna see audiences that really care about your game, and it's really hard to make this decision. When you look at games like World of Warcraft, where they're going through this right now, where someone needs to say, "We need to change our game design direction because it's causing a hemorrhage of players," but is it causing a hemorrhage of profits? And I don't know if there's an easy answer to this one, because as a designer, you want to do whatever's you think is best for your game. For example, World of Warcraft thought segregating the covenant system, making it so you have to spend a lot of time to go switch to a different covenant in World of Warcraft was a good design decision, and their players overwhelmingly did not agree with them. I don't know what their numbers were looking like because the only thing you have is like guesstimates of how many players are online on the servers. But as a designer, one of the most critical moments you can actually do is seeing if the complaints of old time or slash degenerate players are actually worth getting catering to versus the new time players. And I think what's actually important to realize is that there's no good answer to this. As
Well,
a designer, you have to make the decision.
yeah,
And
and I was about to say the designer also has to have good information on the company strategy going into that decision making, right? Because there's
yeah,
a lot of very
finan-
different
yeah,
decisions that the designer can make
yeah,
based on what the company's doing. So, for example, if there's already a company strategy for transitioning or basically building out like a new product that's meant to catch all of those new players, that's instead of trying to put all the growth in one product and try to maintain that much generational sort of divide and make multiple games for multiple groups, it's like a all right, so you know what? Let's not focus on trying to get all these new people into this older game. Let's get them into a newer game. And in the meantime, let's continue to refine and retain refine the game to retain the older players, that type of thing.
just
So
1 second. I'm gonna
yeah,
go get my water, but I still have my headset with me. I'm just not gonna be on the camera.
okay, but yeah,
Um,
so
yeah, I,
that
I, I go ahead. Sorry, Sean.
I was about to say that that's just one of those things too. That I mean, that's not the whole of the answer, but that is one of those things where the
It's
more
not
the
always up to
company
the
can
designer.
help,
Yeah.
yeah, help the designers know what the intent is. And honestly, they should be communicating that to the community as well, right? Like,
Yeah, it's not just on the designer alone, the community manager getting
yeah,
feedback to the designer, and then on top of that, the designer should be able to portray information to senior management, especially those responsible for developing the strategy to attract new players as well as retain their old ones. What
yeah,
kind of players are we wanting to actually make? And I don't think that making an actual game for just one group of community players is not a bad idea. It could also just not be the appropriate strategy for whatever you're trying to do.
yeah,
And I think at some point when you start involving money, your hands are tied on a lot of the decisions you want to make. If they're trying to push a lot of items that give profit and revenue, and you as a designer vehemently disagree with this, your options are try and ride it out and then just feel like you hate your job, or you just try and do the best with what you got. And a lot of the times people do end up doing this. In
yeah,
World of Warcraft's case, it's hard to know because I'm not internal. No one can actually know that stuff. But I think if there is ideally no money involved in a product, and then you made all the decisions early to make something sustainable and would appeal to a certain group of players, I think that would be the best part of doing them justice.
mm.
So I hope that answers the question. It doesn't really, but you
Yeah. I
know,
was about to say, hope that helps, Plurp. Um,
do you have
yeah.
any other questions? I like questions.
Were there any others?
Thoughts on Ultima Online up here?
Oh yeah, there was the question about your thoughts on Ultima Online earlier, right?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say brief things. I didn't have much experience playing it. I think the idea. Oh wait, Dolan. I'll get to you in a second. I'm just gonna answer the Ultima Online question. I'm kind of scrolling up through here. Um, but Ultima Online is just one of those games where I think it was shooting in one specific direction, which is kind of catering to people who really loved persistent online worlds. EverQuest was a persistent online world, but it also had rules and limitations on what you could do. Ultima Online was more of a sandbox, akin to like Star Wars Galaxies with PvP. Um, but instead of Star Wars Galaxies being, just strictly focused on PvP. Ultima Online was strictly focused on doing anything and paying no mind to whatever type of content you were creating. So it's a bottle. This is actually a bottle of water. Let's take a second here. This is a bottle of hand sanitizer. I've had people at companies actually ask me as I'm on Slack, wondering, this is hand sanitizer that was bottled during COVID in a local Pennsylvania factory, and I've actually I just had my nestmate clean this out entirely of hand sanitizer and of course of any residual hand sanitizer, and we put water in it. I actually do this. It's water. That's all it is. Um, but yeah, going back on Ultima Online, I actually really loved the concept of it. The fact that you can go into a virtual world and just do anything you wanted to, screw with anyone's stuff with the stats you had on your character. But also, I think it's very destructive in the sense that you feel like you're committed to logging in and making sure your stuff isn't screwed around with. But that
Yeah.
also was like the lore of the game too. You'd basically be lured into playing it because you want to go play it. And I don't know if that's actually a healthy game design. To some extent, EverQuest still had some of that stuff. I felt like if I was on when a mob spawned, even on TLP, like if I'm in a open world bat phone guild and I have to log on because something just spawned at 3 in the morning, I think that's incredibly toxic to not only my health but the people involved around me. And I think stuff like that actually detracts from the fact that you have a life outside of this game. And you can't revolve your life around EverQuest. Maybe you can when you don't have a dependency on an income source that comes from working 8 hours a day, but not everyone's in that situation. But I also appreciate too that there are games out there that allow you to do that, and I support those people that make those games because it's not what I'd do, but I support the idea that they are out there to be made. Much like
Yeah.
mobile games are made for casual players mostly because they have time to actually look at their phone for a couple minutes a day and then go back to whatever else they were doing. Okay, so Dallin, actually, one of the interesting things about the EverQuest trilogy compatibility layer, there's a couple of videos of it on YouTube. That was an experiment. I think I mentioned it earlier in this interview, but I like to tinker. I like to push the limits of what's possible. That whole DLL that I made was not intentional to actually really like be an actual product or a project that I actually worked on alongside anything else. It was not actually intended to be like a fully committed thing. It was just to see if I could do it. Because I just like to see it sometimes about doing things for the sake of doing things. And the one he was referencing in particular is this one. That's kind of as far as I got it. I got to the point where it was hailing NPCs, but due to a memory corruption bug, it would kind of crash at the same time. So I never I put it down and never got back to it. And to this day, I still get comments on it like, "Hey, do you have any website talking about your progress, or is it still on hold, or something like that?" And the only thing I can reply with is like, "Yes, fully on hold. All of my projects are. I don't have time to actually commit to any of things. I like to tinker, but that doesn't mean that everything I do will actually see completion, and I'm okay with that. I think everyone, to some extent, likes to tinker with things, and I do like to show off what I've done because oftentimes I'm told things aren't possible, and I think being able to do things that are impossible is kind of what my job as an engineer would be. Um, so that's that's the long answer to something. TLDR answer is it was just an experiment, and I'm not doing it anymore because I think that that's all. A lot of my projects never get off the ground. And I never even post them online, but I think stuff like that is really cool. I basically like tinkering for the sake of tinkering, and I think that curiosity gene is what drives me in industry in particular. So what do I do for a living? I'm in games industry as a generalist. I came in here as and I basically had to put that label on myself because when I first got into industry, I was basically a CSR, customer service rep, and then I moved up immediately a year after to programmer. And I think the title they actually put me on was UI programmer, even though that's not what I did at all. I did
Mm,
everything. I wore many hats. But they put it on that because they needed to put a salary to my name. And I think UI programmers were paid less and it would make sense to everyone else. Because I didn't really care about much about funds. When I got moved up to like 25 an hour, that was already more than anyone in my family had ever made in the history of my last name. I just wanted to make stuff that was cool and people actually would appreciate. That's all I ever really wanted to do. I didn't care about, the politics of what I'm affecting or anything. I do now to some extent because there's a lot of things that I have affected that I need to reflect on.
right.
But also, I still just like to tinker. I like to break stuff for the sake of breaking it. When people were out there making aimbots and wall hacks for games, I was trying to think of the most ridiculous thing I could possibly make and do it. Because that's just my curiosity gene and where it goes. It's like when people were making, destructive hacks for guns, I was trying to make rice balls in the sky of just different items that would just like form a spear in the sky. I think stuff like that was cool, and it's just I wanted to see like push the limits of ridiculousness. And I think to some extent that level of comedy that has always kind of sustained me and kept me sane has always just flowed into my development to some extent.
So
I think,
secrets. Speaking
yeah,
of breaking things, we have just come up on the 2 hour mark, and I gotta tell you,
you gotta sleep. I'd
I'm,
imagine.
yeah, I was telling secrets before we started this off. I felt bad because I've been fighting something for like the last 2 or 3 days. I've just been like, I went to bed early last night, so I was like, there's no way we weren't going to do this tonight, but I was definitely struggling. There's a
I'd
comment.
love to come on again, by the way.
Yeah, because there's still
There's
some
so
more to
much
talk
of
about, especially recent stuff, and
yeah.
the people that you've introduced me to, kicking off like our project and all of that. So I tell you what, like, um, I'm glad that we were able to do this because I think it's the first of hopefully more of these where we get people that have actually affected EQ and sort of the community and the all of it,
I love how I
from a
misheard
different
the word
angle.
infected EQ. I mean, that's pretty much we're little viruses that just kind of walk around here. I've always seen myself as like the king of the riffraff, and that's kind of rings true to this day. And I'd also like to mention one thing before we end here.
Sure.
Tac Project is definitely awesome project. I spent a lot of my life preserving EverQuest, but out of all the projects that I've seen come and go, Tech Project, which stands for the Al-Kabra project. Al-Kabra, if you didn't know, was the EverQuest for Macintosh server, and EverQuest for Macintosh was an incredibly important part of not only my history but EverQuest history in general. It was basically frozen in time, and I think it's very important to just emphasize on how important it is to preserve that era of EverQuest. Well, I actually one of the projects that is still going to this day uses my netcode. Well, not my netcode. I basically cobbled together netcode from different people that actually had done it in the past. But I was the one that sat down there for 2 weeks straight, just getting it working, so that we could preserve EverQuest for Macintosh forever. And people have taken and ran my work, and I'm going to leave you guys with a link to the Al-Kabra project's website, which is basically a nice little a pre-templated website. If you go there and you go to the Getting Started guide, you can go check that out. I don't care what you do. I'm not advocating anything. But I really think EverQuest for Macintosh is an important part of EverQuest's history, namely because it actually freezes it in a time that everyone really appreciated, myself entirely. This is the era of EverQuest I grew up in. I remember going with my friends to the Plane of Justice and just kind of sitting out there at the entrance, pulling the random prisoners to the entrance and killing them, getting occasional blue diamond, and that was enough for me. That was this project though is incredibly important because not only is it a client that is basically locked in time stasis, but it's also it has the old UI, the 640 by 480 UI. You can toggle that and the Lachlan UI, which is incredibly cool. That's actually something that I've always wanted. It was like one of my pet peeves is when I started playing the game, I had to start using hacks, which is basically just taking the EQ client.ini file, looking for a new UI and setting it to false. That worked for quite a while, and it works in this too. And interestingly enough, one thing led to another, and I'm just like, I miss this era. And about 2007, I was like, I miss that UI. It was authentic crappiness, and that word still rings true to this day. And Sean, I'll leave you with that word, authentic
Oh,
crappiness, to think about.
yeah. Thank you. I'm hoping when I wake up tomorrow, I do not feel like authentic crappiness. So,
Well, I hope EverQuest's authentic crappiness is precedent in Monsters and Memories, which I'm very looking forward to. I'm I I've purposefully recused myself from lying to the developer application because I'm already in industry. I've already broken into this. There's so many other people that have not yet that I want them to go in there. I want them to. If you're inspired by just hearing about my story of being riffraff that becomes game developer, I think Sean Lord is like the guy if you want to go be a piece of history that's going to make basically an incredible game that has the support of incredible talented people. Go apply. I think there's a actually I think you guys took down the application to get the process
we
built. But
we got a nice
hey, there's an artist
yeah,
position. You could
we
always
got
you always look at
some
that.
really nice applications so far really quickly. It was like within a day. So really appreciate it. And thank you
And
so much for the kind words,
I
Secrets.
think
We
it's gonna be
appreciate it.
incredible. This is gonna make new generations of players just so happy to go in there and experience a game that was like their parents' favorite game, but in a modern era. And I think you guys can kind of pull that off with flying colors. You got some of the most talented people that I know personally working on it. Alley, for example, that guy, Nick from PlanetSide Forever. You have basically you have is Todd Schmidt still working on that? I think he was
Mm,
listed on
mm-mm.
the website.
No,
No.
he was definitely helping give some input and look at some things early on. So
I mean, what
the
if you guys ever get funding, hit me up. I might be there in a year or two, you know?
yeah, it's a different story once the cash is there. So
I know. I
definitely,
know.
I'm sure we'll be seeing you around, and definitely
Also,
appreciate all the help so far.
we'll leave with one thing. I see it talked in chat. TAC Project in particular does not have the mouse wheel, and that's a big turnoff for people. But EverQuest actually didn't have good camera control until it was about the Titanium client, that era, 2003, 2004. So the fact that you guys don't have the scroll wheel that scrolls in and out and changes the perspective, can you do that on stream real quick? You're on EverQuest Live, just to show people what that is. You have a mouse wheel, you can just scroll real
Yep.
quick, Sean. Yeah. So just scroll that stuff in and out. That actually did not exist back in the day. You used to have to press insert and delete and kind of play with the camera angles a little bit just to get your character over to where you wanted to go. That didn't exist. And if you're going to be playing on TAC Project, expect that because that's a core part of EverQuest. The terrible camera controls, much like people like Mario 64, are part of the experience. And I think editing the experience detracts from it. And to some extent, I hate the fact that I can't scroll in and out on Attack Project, but also I think that authentic crappiness is actually what makes it so great. Everyone is subject to the same authentic crappiness. Everyone has to play with the same restrictions and limitations. There's no strafe key in Tac Project. There's no cycle through nearest in Tac Project. And if I ever make my own server again, God, I'm talking about this like I'm actually going to do it. I'm probably not because I've been Nick has been begging me. Nick like Masters of Memories, Nick. That
Mm.
one has been begging me to just make a TAC project on RF2 with one box policy, and I'm like, if I were to do that, I'd have to shut it down. I can't handle that and an actual career at the same time. And plus, I feel like there's so many other people that need their time to shine, and that's why I'm just kind of constantly tinkering. Because if I can make things that can make people make amazing things, or if I could use my talents to actually benefit those who need it, for example, the place I'm working at right now, which I'm not going to say anything more about because of NDA, but I think it's incredible, and you guys definitely check out Tac Project. Definitely check out Monsters and Memories. I honestly believe that Sean's project is going to be possibly the best thing in recent MMO history, and not because it's going to be like high fidelity graphics with a really cool seamless experience, like people putting mountains of money into their engine art, but because it'll be authentic to what people want to see out of EverQuest. Same thing with Pantheon. I think Pantheon, for all the shit people give it, is going to be amazing because there's no, they're finding where their formula works where it doesn't. They're in that process where they haven't really completed development. I'm looking forward to seeing Pantheon too
Yeah, so
because
am I.
at this point in my life, I'm s- I'm not worried about people failing or what they might fail on. I'm worried about seeing what they can do and the best with what they can do. And if I can give them the tools to succeed or the encouragement to succeed just with my words alone, or having them ask the right questions. I didn't touch on the Sploes thing. That was another thing. But we'll get into that another
Next
interview.
time.
Basically, next time. But
Next
yes,
time.
authentic crappiness is probably your new favorite phrase. It was mine for a while when I figured it out. Because Warhammer Online had that's where I coined the term. Because we were like, why can't we train things remotely, like new talent trees and everything? There's a way to do that, and they disabled it. I was like, um, I think that's really convenient, but there's a level of authentic crappiness just having to go back to your trainer to go train things, and that's important to think about. So Anyway, I don't want you to get anything else and die, so I'm gonna let you go. I had a
Thank you
blast
so
here
much.
talking.
It's
Go
been
get some rest,
fantastic
Sean.
having you. Yeah, I
Oh,
cannot wait
thank
to
you.
crawl into bed.
I can't wait to have you healthy again because you need to make this game. So, all
Right
right,
on.
take care, guys. Love you all on Twitch and YouTube, and hopefully you guys are doing safe out there too. Stay safe.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Secrets. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, so much fun. Oh, it was perfect guest as well because like I said, I'm feeling rough. So fortunately Secrets could just go for it. It was fun just listening. Everybody, thank you so much for hanging out tonight. I'm not gonna be on beyond this. We're gonna wrap up and I'm gonna head out. So Eminem, if you like these types of discussions, check out the VODs. We got like over 50 hours worth. Yeah, hit us up on our Discord for the stream or the Eminem Discord as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm hoping I will feel better as well. Felt great this morning when I woke it up, so hopefully that'll be the case tomorrow as well. Yeah, and don't forget, this coming Tuesday, Jay Barbeau, creator of the EverQuest music. I'm really trying to just rest up as much as possible so I don't get sick and can't do that. But this Tuesday, Jay should be here as well for an interview. Same time as today. And yeah. All right. That's it for me. I will clip this, and I think we'll use this as the first of hopefully several mini community streams where we get different people from other aspects of EverQuest in here to talk as well, and then we'll get that up on YouTube. So thanks everybody, and I will see you soon. Hopefully Tuesday at the latest.